Please don't forget subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get notified of new daily videos.
The salt-laced wind tore at Sully Sullivan's oilskins, a familiar biting caress that had defined 2 decades of his life. Below him, the vast expanse of the North Sea churned, a volatile beast he knew intimately. The colossal rig, the Leviathan, thrummed beneath his boots, a symphony of steel and industry. 6 weeks out and the countdown was finally over. Home, retirement, Sarah. The words echoed in his head, a mantra against the roar of the drills and the endless gray horizon. His last shift had been a blur of meticulous checks and grunting camaraderie, his muscles working on autopilot. The fatigue was bone-deep, but it was a good fatigue, earned. Every high-risk penny from every grueling rotation had been poured into a shared dream, a simple, unwavering vision. A small cottage in Blackwater, a fishing boat, mornings with Sarah and a proper cup of tea, not the industrial-strength brew from the rig galley. He had envisioned the smile on her face when he walked through the door, the scent of her cooking, the quiet comfort of their home, built on trust and sweat. He could almost taste it. He stood by the rail, watching the supply chopper descend, its rotors whipping the air into a frenzy. His duffel bag, worn and heavy, was slung over his shoulder. The crew clapped him on the back, calls of "Good luck, Sully," and "Enjoy the rest, mate," ringing in his ears. He nodded, a tight smile on his weathered face. He had earned it. He had earned them both a life of ease. The journey from the helipad, the thud of the rotors fatting, the distant rumble of the rig disappearing behind him, was usually a time of decompression. But today, a strange, creeping unease settled in his gut as the ferry cut through the choppy waters towards Blackwater. It was not the usual anticipatory jitter. It was something colder, a premonition that felt as substantial as the churning gray waves. He tried to shake it off, dismissing it as the overactive imagination of a man too long isolated. Blackwater, the name itself was a comfort. A small coastal town nestled against the bay, its stone houses huddled together, defiant against the elements. The harbor, though not as bustling as in its trawling heyday, still held the scent of salt, diesel, and possibility. Familiar faces waved from the docks. Old Finn O'Connell, nursing a pint outside the Salty Dog Tavern. Arthur Jenkins, directing a crane at Blackwater Marine Logistics, his shoulders hunched with perpetual worry. Sully offered a nod, a wave, but hurried on. He wanted to see Sarah. He walked the familiar cobbled streets, his boots echoing a little too loudly in the evening quiet. The town felt normal, too normal. The soft lights in the windows of Scissors and Secrets glowed, Carla Rossi's salon a beacon of local gossip and gentle chatter. A new, sleek-looking cafe, the Horizon Lounge, jutted out on the old pier, all glass and polished metal, looking out of place, almost jarring in its modernity. He had heard talk of new money changing Blackwater, but he had not given it much thought, too focused on his own quiet future. Then his street, his house, the neat terraced cottage they had bought with their combined savings, a home they had meticulously decorated, room by room, dream by dream. A small patch of garden, always bursting with Sarah's colorful blooms, now looked strangely overgrown, almost neglected. A single light, a low glow from the living room, offered a fleeting sense of relief. But as he reached the front door, his hand outstretched for the key, a chill snaked up his spine. The curtains were drawn, a heavy, uncharacteristic shroud. He pushed the key into the lock, the click unnervingly loud. The air inside was cold, stale. The scent of Sarah's favorite lavender and lemon polish, usually a welcoming embrace, was conspicuously absent. Instead, a faint, almost metallic smell hung in the air, foreign and unsettling. He called her name. "Sarah, I am home." No answer. Only the echo of his own voice, swallowed by the emptiness. The house was meticulously clean, too clean. No dirty dishes in the sink, no magazines splayed on the coffee table, no familiar disarray of a lived-in home. The silence pressed in, a physical weight. He walked through the living room, the kitchen, the small study where Sarah kept her craft supplies. Each room, perfectly ordered, felt hollowed out, stripped of its soul. It was like a show home, sterile and impersonal. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of rising panic. He stumbled into their bedroom, the one place that should have been irrevocably hers, theirs. It, too, was neat, organized. Too organized. The wardrobe doors were ajar, and a quick glance confirmed his fear. Sarah's clothes were gone. Not all of them, but the expensive ones, the new dresses Thorne had apparently bought her, the silk blouses. A few of her older, more sentimental items remained, almost an insult in their abandonment. On the bedside table, where she usually left a stack of library books, lay a single, crisp white envelope. His name, in Sarah's elegant, looping script, stared up at him, a stark white against the dark wood. His fingers trembled as he tore it open. The note was brief, almost clinical. No preamble, no apology, just facts. John, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I know this will be difficult to understand, but I could not stay. Marcus offers a life, a future, I could only ever dream of. A life of opportunity, sophistication. He understands me in a way you never could. He sees my potential. The accounts have been closed, the funds transferred. It was all a joint venture, and I have taken my share. Consider it my contribution to our new beginning. Please do not try to find me. It is over. Sarah. The paper crackled in his hand. Marcus. Thorne. The name from the hushed rumors around town, the charismatic investor who had swept into Blackwater like a sleek, dangerous shark, preying on aspiration. Sully had dismissed it, laughed it off when Sarah spoke of him. He had seen the new clothes, the expensive jewelry, heard the excited chatter about opportunities and investments. He had been too trusting, too blinded by the dream of early retirement, convinced Sarah was simply enjoying a harmless flutter of excitement. Now the words on the page swam before his eyes, blurring into a chaotic mess. Closed, transferred, my share. He snatched up his phone, his calloused thumb fumbling with the screen. He opened his banking app, logged in. The numbers flashed, stark and final. Empty. The joint account, the one they had painstakingly built over 2 decades, every penny, every sacrifice, every rough North Sea storm was gone. Drained. £283,412. Every last bit of it. Their future, meticulously saved, wiped clean. The shock was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole his breath. He collapsed onto the edge of the bed, the mattress still firm and unyielding, just like the cold, hard reality that had crashed down on him. Devastation, pure and unadulterated, washed over him. Then slowly, insidiously, a white-hot rage began to build. He spent the rest of the night packing the empty house, the ghost of Sarah's presence mocking him with every creak of the floorboards. The rage simmered, threatening to boil over. He called friends, old riggers, local lads he had known his whole life. Their voices were full of hesitant sympathy, awkward pauses. Heard she left, Sully, sorry mate. With that Thorne fella, did not think she was the type. No one knew where, no one knew how. Just whispered rumors of a whirlwind romance, a sophisticated new life. He walked to the Blackwater Bank branch the next morning, his mind a haze of fury and disbelief. The cool, polished interior felt alien, intimidating. Mrs. Henderson, the branch manager, a prim woman with tight gray hair, met him in a small, sterile office. She listened, her expression carefully neutral as he stammered out his story, the anger making his voice rough and guttural. Mr. Sullivan, I understand this is distressing, she began, her tone clipped, professional. But all transactions were legally executed. Mrs. Sullivan had full access as a joint account holder, and the closing forms, they appear to be in order. But she took everything, every damn penny, that was our retirement, he roared, slamming his fist on the table, making her flinch. That was my life's work. I am afraid, Mr. Sullivan, she said, retrieving a printed document. Your wife, Sarah Sullivan, executed a full withdrawal and transfer of funds as per the joint account agreement. Furthermore, she dissolved the joint account and activated a dormant clause within a long-standing savings bond, which, again, she had legal access to. Everything was done by the book, it seems. By the book, Sully scoffed, the words tasting like ash. She stole it, she cleared us out. We advise clients that joint accounts inherently carry risks of unilateral withdrawal, Mrs. Henderson stated, her eyes unwavering. There is nothing illegal about a joint account holder accessing or transferring funds. As for the property, she added, consulting another document, it seems there was a prenuptial agreement, quietly amended some years ago. And a new, very strong lien has been placed on the property by a holding company, Aegis Global Holdings, due to an outstanding investment loan apparently taken out by Mrs. Sullivan, in your name as well. This appears to be a legitimate, albeit very complex financial instrument. You are, in effect, in default. Sully stared at her, utterly bewildered. Investment loan, prenup. He had not signed anything. Sarah handled all the paperwork, the boring bits, as she called them. He trusted her. He always trusted her. The world, which had seemed so straightforward and honest, was suddenly a labyrinth of hidden clauses and legal traps. He stumbled out of the bank, the gray Blackwater light feeling harsh, unforgiving. His anger was still a roaring inferno, but now it was laced with a chilling, helpless despair. He tried the police. Constable Davies, Chloe's older brother, listened patiently, but his eyes held a familiar, sympathetic pity. "Look, Sully, I am sorry, mate," Davies said, his voice softer than Mrs. Henderson's, but just as unhelpful. "It is a civil matter. Not theft, not by law. She is your wife, or was. Joint accounts, it is messy. Unless you can prove coercion or fraud, and that is a whole other ball game. Hard to prove when the funds are gone and she is unavailable." "She is with him," Sully yelled, the name Marcus Thorne burning his tongue. "He put her up to it. He conned her, then he conned me." Davies just shook his head, a grim line to his lips. "Without any evidence of direct fraud against you, John, or a missing person report, our hands are tied. It just looks like a messy divorce." A messy divorce. The word stung. He walked the docks, the familiar smells of brine and diesel fuel doing nothing to soothe him. Fishermen sorted their nets, gulls wheeled overhead, their cries indifferent. Life went on, oblivious to the gaping wound in his chest. He could not pay his electricity bill, the notice already taped to his door. The rig's next rotation was still weeks away, and his savings were gone. He was destitute. The cold reality of his situation pressed down on him, suffocating. He thought about selling the house, but Mrs. Henderson's words echoed. A lien. Whatever Thorne had done, he had tied up their property, made it untouchable. He ended up at the Salty Dog Tavern, the familiar gloom a small comfort. Finn O'Connell looked up as Sully entered, his weathered eyes narrowing slightly. "Rough passage, lad," he grunted, sliding a pint across the bar without a word. Sully took a long, desperate swig. "Rougher than the North Sea in a Force 10, Finn," he muttered. He watched the locals, their faces etched with the honest fatigue of hard labor. They greeted him, offered condolences, but averted their gazes. He saw the pity, the awkwardness. He was now that guy, the one who had been left. He was a cautionary tale, a mark. He finished his pint, the warmth doing little to thaw the icy despair gripping him. He had nowhere to go, no money, no job prospects, no home, no wife. Just the phantom ache of betrayal and the burning ember of a single, raw question. How could she? He needed answers. Not just for the money, but for himself, for the man he was, for the trust he had poured into a life that was now utterly decimated. He stood up, leaving the empty glass on the counter. Finn watched him go, a knowing sadness in his deep-set eyes. Sully walked back out into the gathering gloom of Blackwater, the indifferent hum of the town echoing his own hollow heart. He would not be able to stay in Blackwater much longer if he could not find a way to make sense of this, to even pay for a roof over his head. He was losing everything. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was only the beginning of Marcus Thorne's insidious reach. The roar of the North Sea had always been a balm to John Sullivan's soul, a symphony of purpose and power. Now, the silence of his empty Blackwater cottage, 3 days after finding Sarah's note, was a deafening void. He had torn through the house like a wild animal, upending drawers, ripping apart old photo albums, shouting questions at the peeling wallpaper. The bank had confirmed the worst. A joint account, emptied. His name on a dotted line he vaguely remembered signing, giving Sarah full access. Thorne's signature was not there, not yet, but his shadow loomed. Rage had been a blinding fog, propelling him through the town's familiar streets like a man possessed. He had cornered old Mrs. Davies from the bakery, who had seen Sarah with a lovely, very charming gentleman by the new marina. He had badgered the surly bartender at the Salty Dog, who had offered only a shrug and a half-eaten bag of crisps. Each dead end, each averted gaze, each vague platitude from someone who did not want to get involved only sharpened his fury. The police, when he finally swallowed his pride and called, had been polite, professional, and utterly useless. A marital dispute, Mr. Sullivan. No evidence of coercion. Adult woman made her choice. His choice, their future. He clung to the scraps, piecing together a timeline. Sarah's increasingly long shopping trips to the city. The sudden, uncharacteristic interest in an investment portfolio Thorne had supposedly introduced her to. A glossy brochure for the Obsidian Coast Resort, half hidden beneath a stack of old magazines, a picture of Sarah smiling, posed with Thorne, her hand resting delicately on his arm. It was a week old, an advertisement for the resort's grand opening gala. That was his lead. His only lead. The drive out of Blackwater felt like passing through a portal. The familiar, wind-battered fishing villages gave way to manicured lawns, then sprawling, glass and steel structures hugging the coastline. The Obsidian Coast Resort was a monstrosity of black glass and polished concrete, a gleaming shard ripped from some metropolis and impaled on the wild North Sea shore. It radiated wealth, exclusivity, and a cold indifference that made Sully's blood run hot. He was still in his work clothes, the only clean ones he had left, faded jeans, a thick, cable-knit jumper, and his heavy work boots. He reeked of diesel and desperation, a jarring contrast to the valet attendants gliding silently between impossibly expensive cars. He parked his dented Land Rover in the staff parking lot, a defiant act that earned him a glare from a security guard, and stalked towards the main entrance. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and hushed conversations, a symphony of clinking champagne glasses and low, cultured laughter. He felt like an intrusion, a rogue wave threatening to disrupt a placid, artificial pond. His eyes, honed by years of scanning treacherous North Sea horizons, cut through the superficiality, searching. He spotted her first, through a wide archway leading to a lounge overlooking the sea. Sarah. She was leaning against a black marble bar, a flute of champagne in her hand, dressed in a shimmering dress of a deep sapphire blue, a color he had never seen her wear. Her hair, usually tied back in a practical ponytail, was styled in soft waves, catching the light. She laughed, a bright, carefree sound he had not heard in years, and the sound twisted something sharp in his gut. Then he saw him, Marcus Thorne. He stood beside her, a hand casually resting on the small of her back. Thorne was taller than Sully had imagined, impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that seemed to flow around him. His hair was streaked with silver at the temples, his smile easy and practiced, a mask of charm that spoke of endless confidence. He embodied everything Sully was not, smooth, elegant, detached, and he was holding his life. Sully felt a primitive growl rise in his throat. He pushed through the throng, oblivious to the polite murmurs of annoyance, the sharp intakes of breath as his unkempt presence carved a path through their refined tableau. Sarah, his voice, rough and raw, cut across the genteel hum. Her head snapped up, her eyes, once soft and familiar, now narrowed in a flicker of annoyance, then fear, and finally something colder. Disdain. "John," she said, as if tasting something unpleasant. Thorne turned slowly, a faint, polite smile on his lips that did not reach his eyes. His gaze swept over Sully, a quick, dismissive assessment that took in the worn clothes, the desperate fury, the very essence of the man he had wronged, and found him wanting. "Sarah, we need to talk," Sully ground out, ignoring Thorne. His gaze was fixed on her, pleading, demanding an explanation. Sarah stepped away from Thorne, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. "There is nothing to talk about, John," she said, her voice low, but carrying a chilling certainty. "I left you a note. I told you." "Told me?" Sully scoffed, his voice rising. "You told me you were leaving with this weasel. You emptied our account, our retirement, our life." He gestured wildly between her and Thorne. "What did he do to you? What did he promise you?" Thorne's smile tightened slightly, a subtle shift that sent a prickle of unease down Sully's spine. He did not speak, just observed, like a scientist studying a specimen. Sarah flinched at Sully's raised voice, her eyes darting around the suddenly silent lounge. Patrons were turning, their polite murmurs replaced by curious stares. "Lower your voice, John. You are making a scene." She cast a quick, anxious glance at Thorne, as if seeking his approval. "A scene," Sully felt his jaw clench. You stole my life and you are worried about a scene." He stepped closer, oblivious to the subtle movement of two security personnel in dark suits, now slowly approaching. "Come home, Sarah. Whatever he has told you, whatever lie, it is not worth it." Sarah's eyes hardened, a flicker of true malice replacing the fear. "You think this is a lie, John? This," she gestured around the opulent lounge, a disdainful sweep of her hand that encompassed Sully, "is my life now. This is real. You and your oil rig, your dingy pub, your endless talk of sensible savings, that was the lie. That was the cage." She took a step back, aligning herself with Thorne, her hand now slipping into his, a public declaration of allegiance. "Marcus offered me a future, John. A real one. You just offered me another decade of waiting for your pension." Sully stared at her, the words like physical blows. This was not the Sarah he knew. Her eyes, once warm and clear, were now clouded with a brittle ambition, a cruel edge. She was a stranger. Thorne finally spoke, his voice a low, smooth baritone that was both calming and utterly commanding. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, the name a casual dismissal. "I understand this is difficult for you, but Sarah has made her choice. I suggest you respect it." His gaze, suddenly sharp, held a flicker of something predatory, a silent warning. "Further harassment will not be tolerated." Before Sully could respond, the two security guards were at his side, their presence imposing, their movements silent. "Sir, we will have to ask you to leave." He stood there, a blue-collar man amidst a sea of black ties and silk dresses, his chest heaving, his fists clenched uselessly. He looked at Sarah one last time, hopping for a flicker of recognition, a hint of the woman he loved. There was nothing, just cold, polished indifference. He looked at Thorne, who gave him another faint, mocking smile. Sully felt something inside him twist, break, and then harden. He let the guards guide him out, their hands firm but not violent. As they escorted him across the gleaming lobby, past the discreetly whispering patrons, he felt the weight of Thorne's victory, the effortless way he had dismantled Sully's life, not with brute force, but with a casual, chilling elegance. He drove away from the Obsidian Coast Resort with a hollow ache in his chest, a deep, festering wound that no amount of rage could cauterize. The legal letter arrived a week later, sliding through the mail slot of his empty cottage like a venomous snake. It was from Thorne's legal firm, a prestigious London outfit he had never heard of. A formal cease and desist, an injunction filed against him, citing harassment and defamation. Any further contact with Sarah Sullivan or Marcus Thorne, any attempt to disrupt their business or personal affairs, would result in severe legal action. The language was cold, precise, impenetrable. It barred him from their lives, erecting an invisible, unbreachable wall. He read it 3 times, crumpled it, and threw it into the cold fireplace. He was gagged. He was powerless. Then came the call from Henderson, his rig boss. His voice, usually booming and jovial, was clipped, uncharacteristically formal. "Sully," Henderson began, without his usual preamble. "Look, mate, this is not easy to say. I just got off the phone with corporate. There has been an issue." Sully felt a cold dread creep up his spine. What issue? A regulatory breach. Allegations of falsifying maintenance logs on the Alpha 4 platform, specifically around the hydraulic stress tests for the drilling assembly. Apparently, the dates on the reports do not match the digital timestamps, and there is a discrepancy in the requisition for the high-tensile bolts. Henderson paused, the silence heavy. "It is serious, John. Could compromise structural integrity. They are saying gross negligence, maybe even fraud for the replacement parts." Sully felt a rush of blood to his head. "What? That is impossible. I signed off on every log, every part. Everything was double-checked." He was meticulous, obsessive about safety. Lives depended on it. "I know, John. We all know you are thorough. But the evidence, it is all there, apparently. Digital records. Witness statements from the procurement team saying you signed off on the incorrect parts delivery." "That is a lie," Sully roared. "I never saw incorrect parts. Who is saying this?" "Names are confidential, John, but it is all very well documented. An internal investigation, very quick, very thorough. Head office is calling it a risk to operations. They have terminated your contract, effective immediately, and they are flagging your record for future employment in the sector." The words hung in the air, a death knell for his entire life. Dismissal, blacklisting. His career, his identity, gone. He had worked the North Sea since he was 18, his hands hardened by the salt and steel, his mind sharpened by the constant vigilance required to keep a rig running. It was not just a job, it was who he was. "They are framing me," Sully said, his voice flat, hollow. He knew instinctively who was behind it. Thorne. It was too precise, too devastating to be coincidence. Thorne was not just taking his money and his wife, he was erasing him. Henderson sighed, a weary sound. "Look, John, I fought for you, told them it was bollocks. But they have got everything locked down. Lawyers are involved. They are advising me to tell you not to come to the docks, not to try and collect your gear. It will be shipped to your house. Do not cause trouble, John. Just let it go." Let it go. The phrase echoed in the empty cottage, mocking him. He slammed the phone down, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. He was a ghost, a non-person, no wife, no money, no job, no future. Desperate, he tried the local police again. This time, he laid out everything, the money, Sarah's note, Thorne's background, the resort, the legal threat, now the job loss. He presented his story, a lifetime of honest work, against the shadowy machinations of a man he barely knew. They listened, impassive. Detective Sergeant Miller, a portly man with tired eyes, nodded occasionally, scribbling notes. "Mr. Sullivan," Miller finally said, leaning back in his creaking chair at the Blackwater police station. "I understand your frustration, but your wife voluntarily left. We have no evidence of criminal activity on Mr. Thorne's part, only your allegations. The financial matters, joint accounts, that is a civil issue, not a criminal one. Your job dismissal is an internal company matter. We cannot intervene in any of this without concrete proof of a crime, not just feelings or suspicions." "He framed me," Sully insisted, pounding a fist on the worn desk. "He manipulated the system. This is not how it works." Miller sighed, his gaze drifting to a framed certificate on the wall. "That is exactly how it works, Mr. Sullivan. If someone is clever enough and has the resources, they can make things very difficult for others within the letter of the law. You would need substantial evidence to prove malicious intent, and then a barrister willing to take on a fight against a firm like Mr. Thorne's. And quite frankly, Mr. Sullivan," he added, his voice softer, "you do not have the resources for that." Sully left the station, the weight of his helplessness crushing him. He walked slowly towards the Blackwater Assize's house, the impressive gray stone building that housed the town's courtrooms. He had passed it 1,000 times, seeing it as a symbol of justice, of order. Now, its stern, Gothic facade felt like a monument to indifference. He stood across the street, watching lawyers in crisp suits hurry through its heavy oak doors, their briefcases presumably filled with the intricate arguments that could dismantle a life or protect a lie. He had no such weapons. His name, John Sullivan, once synonymous with hard work and reliability on the docks, was now whispered with pity or suspicion. He was the man who had lost his wife, his money, and his job. The village, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage of judgment. The cold North Sea wind whipped around him, stinging his eyes. He was adrift, stripped of everything that defined him. But as the initial waves of despair subsided, something colder, harder began to form deep within him. Not the blind rage of before, but a quiet, searing resolve. They thought he was broken, ruined. They thought he would just disappear. Thorne had manipulated the law, twisted the truth, and used money and power to make him a ghost. But Sully was a rig man. He knew how to find the weak points in a structure, how to fix what was broken, and how to fight against overwhelming forces. He would find Thorne's weak point. He would learn his game. He would make him pay, not just for Sarah and their future, but for the fundamental injustice of it all. This was not just about vengeance anymore. This was about proving that even a man with nothing could fight a system that was rigged to protect the powerful. He would not just survive, he would reckon. The dark clouds of injustice gathered above Blackwater, and Sully, a solitary figure against the imposing courthouse, knew his fight had only just begun. The stale air in Sully's rented room clung to him, a shroud woven from cheap cigarette smoke and the dust of abandoned hopes. Every breath tasted of defeat. His once sturdy frame felt hollow, his hands, calloused from years of North Sea winds and heavy steel, now hung useless at his sides. The small, peeling room above Mrs. Henderson's bakery was a stark testament to his ruin. A cot, a battered chest of drawers, and a single, unshaded bulb casting a jaundiced glow on the bare walls. It had been weeks since he had returned to an empty home, a drained account, and Sarah's chilling farewell. Weeks since Thorne's machinations had cost him his rig job and stained his name at the Blackwater Assizes house. He was a man shipwrecked, stripped of everything, left with nothing but a corrosive rage and a gnawing ache where his future used to be. He still picked at the wound of Sarah's betrayal, turning it over and over in his mind like a stone from the beach. How could she? How could he? Marcus Thorne, a ghost in tailored suits, had not just taken his money and his wife. He had stolen the very foundation of Sully's belief in hard work and honest reward. The police, with their polite disdain, had dismissed him as a vengeful fool. The banks, citing legal jargon, had offered no recourse. He was an easy mark, a blue-collar man out of his depth in a sea of sophisticated treachery. But the North Sea had taught Sully resilience, a stubborn refusal to drown. He might not know the rules of this new game, but he understood currents, and he understood the unforgiving nature of a predator. His search began crudely, driven by a raw, unthinking need for answers. He spent hours hunched over a public library computer, his large fingers fumbling on the unfamiliar keyboard, then moved to the battered laptop he had bought at a pawn shop, its screen flickering like his dwindling hope. He searched for Marcus Thorne, then financial fraud Blackwater, then wife left with con artist. Each query felt like shouting into a void. The internet, a sprawling, indifferent beast, offered celebrity gossip, stock market reports, and endless ways to get scammed himself. He found articles about Thorne's supposed legitimate ventures, glowing profiles of his success, all curated with an irritating polish that made Sully's blood run cold. Then, buried deep on a local Blackwater forum, nested between posts about lost cats and arguments over fishing quotas, he found it. A thread, started months ago, titled, "Anyone else had dealings with Quiet Anchor Retirement Advisory?" The posts were a mix of worried inquiries and outright accusations, echoing his own story in chilling detail. Small investors, local families, elderly residents, all lured by promises of impossibly high returns, all left with empty accounts. The name Thorne was not explicitly mentioned, but the modus operandi was unmistakable. Charismatic advice, exclusive opportunities, then a vanishing act. A cold certainty settled over Sully, replacing the white-hot rage. This was not just Sarah's personal betrayal. This was a pattern. This was a professional. He remembered Sarah's glowing praise for the Quiet Anchor, how Marcus Thorne had revolutionized their retirement plans. He had dismissed it then, trusting Sarah's judgment. Now it was a roadmap. The Quiet Anchor Retirement Advisory Office, just a few blocks from Blackwater's bustling square, now stood as a silent monument to dashed dreams. It was a modest Victorian terraced house, its sage-green door peeling, the window boxes barren. He remembered it bustling with nervous, hopeful Blackwater folk, like himself and Sarah, seeking security for their twilight years. Now, a for lease sign hung askew in the window, faded by sun and time. The glass was smeared, but he could just make out the interior. Beige walls, functional carpet, a single, neglected pot plant in the reception area. The pervasive smell of old paper and dust, even through the glass, seemed to carry the weight of shattered futures. Sully circled the building, his heavy work boots unusually quiet on the residential street. No alarms, no obvious security. Thorne was not bothering to guard his abandoned fronts. The back alley was narrow, filled with overflowing bins and the scent of damp earth. A small window, usually locked tight, was slightly ajar, rattling in the faint sea breeze. It took a quiet pry from a bar he found wedged in a discarded crate, a quick, silent slide of the sash. He was in. Inside, the silence was almost reverent, heavy with the ghosts of hopeful conversations. The main consultation office was exactly as he remembered. Comfortable, worn armchairs, a heavy oak desk. He ran a calloused hand over its polished surface, picturing Thorne, smooth and solicitous, drawing people in. A discreet shredder, still plugged in, sat beside the desk, its maw empty. On the wall, framed, certificates of financial accreditation hung crookedly, some authentic, some likely fabricated, now meaningless. He found old client files in a locked cabinet in the cramped back office. The lock was flimsy, designed for privacy, not security. Inside, a stack of folders, dusty and forgotten. He pulled one out. John Thompson, retired fisherman. Investment, £80,000. Expected return, fantastical. Actual return, 0. The next, Mrs. Agnes Miller, widowed shopkeeper. Investment, £45,000. Her life savings, gone. Their stories, written in neat hand on ledger paper, echoed his own. Each name, a prick of ice, then a surge of cold fury. Thorne had not just taken from him, he had systematically decimated the dreams of his entire community. He found Sarah's file, tucked behind a handful of others, almost an afterthought. The handwriting on the file tab was Thorne's, neatly printed. Inside, a copy of their joint account details, their mortgage information, even the sentimental value he had placed on their small savings for a cottage by the sea. All laid bare, dissected, analyzed. It was not just a betrayal, it was a clinical operation. Sarah had been a pawn, willingly, blindly, but a pawn all the same. The rage that had been a wildfire now settled into a colder, harder flame. This was no longer just about getting his money back or confronting Sarah. This was about exposing a predator. This was about justice for every John Thompson, every Agnes Miller, every trusting soul Thorne had devoured. He spent the next few days in a quiet, almost obsessive routine. His sparse room became his command center, maps of Blackwater spread across the cot, marked with pins and cryptic notes. He learned to navigate obscure financial news sites, cross-reference company registrations. His blue-collar ingenuity, honed by solving complex problems on an oil rig, now applied itself to a different kind of intricate system. He was looking for patterns, for anomalies, for the invisible threads that connected Thorne's victims. He compiled names, dates, amounts. He saw the shift from the smaller, local scams run through the quiet anchor to the broader, more opulent stage Thorne now commanded. He needed more. He needed history. He needed someone who understood the deeper currents of this kind of fraud. His search for more on Blackwater's financial underbelly led him to the local library, a sturdy brick building on a quiet side street. He was looking for old council records, local business archives, anything that might shed light on Thorne's initial infiltration. It was there, amidst the hushed rustle of turning pages and the comforting scent of old books, that he found Eleanor Vance. She was exactly where Chloe Davies, the local reporter he had tried to reach, said she'd be. Tucked away in the deepest corner of the nonfiction section, perched on a rolling ladder, her back to the room. Her streaked gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and a network of fine lines crinkled around her piercing blue eyes, giving her an almost permanent frown, even when she was not looking at anything in particular. She wore a sensible, slightly outdated cardigan, and as she descended the ladder, her hand instinctively went to a small silver locket at her throat. She moved with a quiet, meticulous precision, her gaze sweeping over the room, missing nothing, yet seeming to register no one. Sully, feeling clumsy and out of place in his worn work jacket, approached her. "Excuse me," he rumbled, his voice rough. Eleanor turned, her eyes, sharp and assessing, locking onto his. There was no warmth, only a clinical appraisal. "Can I help you?" Her voice was low, devoid of inflection. "I am looking for old financial records. Anything on local investment firms. Specifically, something called Quiet Anchor Retirement Advisory." He held up a crumpled printout from the online forum. Her gaze flickered to the paper, then back to his face, a subtle tightening around her mouth. "That firm," she stated, not a question. "It ceased operations several months ago. Many of its clients, unfortunately, suffered significant losses." Sully nodded, a bitter taste in his mouth. "I know, I was one of them, my wife too." The words were out before he could catch them, raw and heavy. "She left with the man behind it, Marcus Thorne." He watched her carefully. Her expression remained neutral, but a flicker in her eyes, a minute tension in her jaw betrayed her. He saw it, a spark of recognition, a deeper knowing. "Marcus Thorne," she repeated, the name like a curse on her tongue, though her tone remained flat. "He is a ghost, Mr. Sullivan, an illusionist, very good at vanishing acts." "He vanished with everything I had," Sully countered, a flash of his old anger breaking through. And a lot of other people's everything too, from what I am reading. He gestured to the forum printout. This is not a one-off. He has done this before. Eleanor finally lowered the book she held, placing it precisely on a nearby cart. Indeed, she said, her voice now colder, sharper. Marcus Thorne has a rather extensive repertoire. It is not always financial advisory. Sometimes it is art. Sometimes it is real estate. Always it is about identifying a specific vulnerability, a desire for status, a need for security, a belief in a path to wealth that feels exclusive. She paused, her eyes piercing him. You do not strike me as the exclusive path to wealth type, Mr. Sullivan. I was the trusting type, Sully admitted, meeting her gaze head-on. The one who believed my wife, who believed in honest work, he blew that to hell. Now I just want to know how he does it, and how to stop him. Eleanor studied him, a long, uncomfortable silence stretching between them. She saw the rough edges, the raw pain, but also something else, an unyielding, blue-collar stubbornness that she recognized. It was not just rage, it was a demand for accountability, a thirst for truth. She saw a reflection of her own buried past. He is very thorough, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. He leaves no trace. He covers his tracks with intricate legal loopholes, shell corporations, and a network of proxies. Anyone who tries to expose him, well, they usually end up like you, Mr. Sullivan, stripped bare or worse. She touched the silver locket at her throat. I speak from experience. Sully leaned closer, a sudden, desperate hope blossoming in his chest. You knew him. You were one of his victims. Her lips thinned into a grim line. I was a financial analyst years ago. I uncovered one of his schemes. I tried to expose him. He framed me for insider trading, destroyed my career, my reputation, my life savings. Her eyes, usually so guarded, now held a flicker of deep-seated resentment. I narrowly avoided jail. She paused, then added, It was Marcus Thorne, though he used a different name then. But the patterns are always the same, like a signature. A profound shift happened within Sully. The fire in his gut, once a chaotic blaze of personal vengeance, now refined into a colder, more concentrated heat. This was not just about Sarah anymore. This was a battle against a calculating, unseen enemy who preyed on the vulnerable, who knew how to twist trust into ruin. Eleanor Vance, this quiet, unassuming librarian, was the first true piece of the puzzle. She understood. She knew the language of the enemy. So you just hid? Sully asked, not unkindly, but with a raw edge of disbelief. Eleanor's gaze hardened. I learned to observe, to watch, to wait. I learned that the official channels rarely catch men like Thorne. They operate in the shadows where the law struggles to reach. She looked at the crumpled printout in his hand, then at the scattered library books on his makeshift table. You are doing rudimentary research, Mr. Sullivan. You are following the breadcrumbs, but Thorne does not leave breadcrumbs. He leaves illusions, carefully constructed to misdirect. You need to see through the illusion. How? Sully asked, his voice low but firm. The despair was gone, replaced by an intellectual hunger. Eleanor took a deep breath, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. He preys on aspirations, on dreams. He offers what people desperately want, and then he takes everything. But even an illusionist leaves a trail if you know where to look, not in what he shows you, but in what he tries to hide. She looked directly at Sully, a glimmer of something beyond cynicism in her eyes. He is still operating, is not he? In Blackwater. Yes, Sully confirmed, his jaw tight. He is still here, and I am going to find him. Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if steeling herself. You will not find him, Mr. Sullivan, by chasing shadows. You will find him by understanding the patterns, by anticipating his next move, and by building a better illusion. He is a predator, she said, her voice dropping, but even predators have predictable hunting grounds. A new, colder resolve settled deep in Sully's bones. He was not alone in this fight. This reclusive librarian, scarred by Thorne just like him, offered not just knowledge, but a path. As Eleanor finally turned and began pushing her book cart down the aisle, the silver locket glinting under the fluorescent lights, Sully watched her go. He did not know how, but he knew one thing: he needed her. And she, in her own cynical, hidden way, needed him too. He had his first ally. Now he just had to find the others. He looked down at the scribbled names and figures on his notes. A network of victims, and a plan, still hazy but forming, began to take shape in his mind. The real fight was just beginning. The salt-laced wind, once a familiar comfort, now scraped against John Sullivan's raw nerves. Eleanor Vance's words still echoed in his mind, precise and chilling, peeling back the layers of Marcus Thorne's charming facade to reveal the predator beneath. A professional. A systemic corruption, not just a personal betrayal. Her own scarred past, hinted at in the hushed library, had given his rage a new, cold edge. It was not just about Sarah anymore, though her ghost still clung to every shadow in Blackwater. It was about justice, about exposing the viper that had coiled itself around his community. He clutched the crumpled scrap of paper Eleanor had given him, a name, a local address. Chloe Davies, investigative reporter for the Blackwater Beacon. He had seen her name on articles, usually about council squabbles or missing cats. He doubted she would take a man whose life had just been detonated seriously, but Eleanor had been insistent. "She has an eye for the unseen," she had murmured, her gaze distant and knowing. Sully found the Beacon office nestled amongst a row of older shops, its painted sign peeling in places. Inside, the air hummed with the dry scent of newsprint and stale coffee. Chloe Davies sat behind a desk piled high with papers, a slender silver pen habitually tapping against her chin. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hazel eyes, sharp and alert, swept over him as he approached. She looked tired, but also intensely curious. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice clear, almost clinical. "I heard you were dismissed from the rig. A difficult situation, I understand." The slight pause carried the unspoken local gossip, the whispers of financial impropriety that Thorne had expertly orchestrated. Sully felt a familiar prick of indignation, but the nascent lessons in emotional control, half-formed from Eleanor's advice, held it in check. This was not about him being a victim. It was about Thorne being a perpetrator. "It was rigged," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, though his hands, calloused from years of working steel in freezing winds, clenched under the table. "Everything Thorne touches is rigged." Chloe's pen stopped, her gaze sharpened, assessing. "That is a strong accusation, Mr. Sullivan. Do you have proof?" He pushed a folder across the desk. It was not thick, but it contained the few physical remnants of his wreckage. His empty bank statements, the eviction notice from his home, and a photocopy of the obscure online forum post Eleanor had helped him find, detailing a similar scam in another coastal town, Marcus Thorne's name appearing like a dark stain. He had meticulously highlighted every commonality, every pattern Eleanor had pointed out. Chloe picked up the folder, her brow furrowed. She scanned the documents, her eyes moving rapidly. "The Quiet Anchor Retirement Advisory," that firm went belly up a few years back. Lots of older folk lost their savings. "Thorne had a hand in it," she murmured, more to herself than him. He bought it out slowly through shell companies, drained it dry. Then he moved on to bigger things, leaving a trail of broken lives, Sully explained, his voice low but firm. "He did it to me, he did it to Sarah, and he is doing it to others right now." He explained Eleanor's connection, not nomming her directly but referencing her experience and the insights she had provided. She saw his pattern years ago. He ruined her too, but she saw him coming. Chloe looked up, her skepticism warring with a nascent journalistic hunger. "This is compelling, Mr. Sullivan, and you are telling me this is not about just getting your wife back." "It started that way," Sully admitted, meeting her gaze squarely. "But when you see the damage this man does, the way he preys on trust, on people's hopes, it stops being just about you. It becomes about stopping him, for everyone else." He saw a flicker in her eyes, a recognition of something beyond personal vengeance. Chloe closed the folder slowly, tapping the pen against it. "Okay, Mr. Sullivan, this is a big story, a dangerous one. I am going to need to verify every single detail, but I will start digging. First, I am going to look into this Quiet Anchor angle, see if there are more names, more patterns." She paused, then offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. "And you can call me Chloe." Sully felt a fragile thread of hope, the first since Sarah had left. "Thank you, Chloe." His next stop, Chloe suggested, was Lena Volkov. "She is a tech wizard, runs a repair shop near the old dock. If Thorne has a digital footprint, Lena can find it, but she is particular." Lena's shop, Volkov Electronics, was a stark contrast to the old-world charm of Blackwater. Its window displayed a dizzying array of circuit boards, old game consoles, and a sign declaring repairs, data recovery, digital solutions. Inside, the air hummed with the faint scent of ozone, and Lena herself was a study in controlled chaos. Her dark hair, streaked with purple, was often falling into her pale gray eyes as she hunched over a dismantled laptop, tiny intricate tattoos visible on her forearms. Sully, feeling clumsy and out of place among the blinking lights and soldering irons, explained his situation again. Lena listened, her eyes fixed on the circuit board, only occasionally glancing up. He felt like he was speaking a foreign language. "So the man conned you. Took your money, your wife. You want me to hack him?" Lena's voice was quiet, almost flat, but held an unexpected sharpness. She did not look at him when she asked the question, her focus still on the microcomponents. "I want you to find how he does it, how he hides his money, how he covers his tracks," Sully said patiently. "Chloe thinks he has got a web digital fronts, places like the Gilded Front, that new complex. She thinks he uses it to lure people in online." Lena finally looked at him, her gaze unnervingly direct. "I do not work for vengeance, I work for justice. There is a difference." Her fingers, nimble and precise, reconnected a ribbon cable. "He preys on the vulnerable. He tears lives apart. He uses technology to do it, to hide and to control," Sully insisted, echoing Aliner's words about Thorne's sophisticated methods. "He framed me, Lena, for something I did not do. He made it look real. He is good at making fakes." Lena paused, her fingers hovering. "Fakes, digital fakes," she muttered, a flicker of something that looked like professional curiosity in her eyes. "Exploiting systems, not just people. That is different. I do not help people break laws, Mr. Sullivan, but I have a problem with systems being exploited to harm innocent people." Sully understood. He was not asking her to just hit a button. He was asking her to fight the injustice woven into the digital fabric Thorne had created. He laid out the evidence Chloe had already begun to corroborate about the quiet anchor, the mounting disappearances and financial anomalies in Blackwater that Chloe was now investigating. Lena sat back, observing him for a long moment. "I will look, no promises, but if what you are saying is true, if he is using digital infrastructure to actively exploit this community, then that is a challenge I might be interested in." She turned back to her work. "Come back tomorrow. I will see what I can find on the Gilded Front, what kind of digital presence it actually has." Leaving the shop, Sully felt a surge of cautious optimism. 2 down, he was getting somewhere. Next, Sully needed eyes on the ground, a deep knowledge of Blackwater's undercurrents. There was only one man for that, Finn O'Connell. He found Finn where he always was, behind the bar of the Salty Dog Tavern, polishing glasses with a practiced, almost meditative rhythm. The pub was mostly empty this early in the afternoon, smelling of stale beer and distant salt. Finn, his weathered face a roadmap of hard years, did not look up as Sully ordered a pint of the local ale. "Trouble finds you, Sully?" he grumbled, his deep sea-blue eyes, often squinted against the sun, now looking tired. He knew everything, Finn did. The whole town's pulse beat through the Salty Dog. "Thorne," Sully said, simple and direct. Finn snorted, a sound like an old engine turning over. "I heard that snake has been slithering around. Took your missus, took your pension, took your good name. What is next?" "The tide." "He is not just a snake, Finn. He is a viper. And he is poisoning the whole harbor," Sully said, setting down his pint. He told Finn about Aliner, again without nomming her, speaking of a former financial expert who recognized Thorne's pattern. He spoke of Chloe, who was already digging, and Lena, who was mapping Thorne's digital web. He spoke of the quiet anchor, of the whispers Finn himself must have heard for years, the subtle shifts in the town's economy, the families who had suddenly gone quiet after investing in Thorne's shiny new ventures at the Gilded Front. Finn listened, his gruff exterior slowly shifting. He wiped down the bar, his hands calloused and strong. I have seen his type before. Different suits, different names, same hungry eyes, always looking for a clean harbor to foul." He paused, squinting at a distant boat through the window. "He has been sniffing around the Mariners' Guild Hall, too. Wants to restore it, he says. Wants access to their old funds, more like." And young Arthur Jenkins, down at Blackwater Marine Logistics, he has been stretched thin lately. Thorne's company, Aegis Artifacts, has been using his services, but the payments are peculiar, slow. Trying to squeeze him, that one is. Sully nodded. This was exactly what he needed. Local knowledge, the gut feeling of someone who knew Blackwater in his bones. I need eyes, Finn. I need to know what he is doing, who he is talking to, who he is trying to rope in. Finn poured himself a measure of whiskey. I have got eyes, always have. And these walls, he patted the worn oak bar, they have got ears. You need a quiet corner, a place to talk where no one asks questions. This is it. The snug in the back, it is always open for those who need to get away from the glare. For honest men, mind. He looked at Sully, a flicker of genuine respect in his eyes. You have got a good fight in you, Sully, not just anger. That is worth something. Sully returned the nod, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken alliance. The final piece of the puzzle, for now, was Kieran Doyle. Eleanor had given Sully his name, describing him as a private investigator, a former detective who had been burned by a con artist years ago, much like herself. He had moved to Blackwater, keeping a low profile, running a small asset recovery agency. Kieran's office was above a fish and chip shop, and the smell of grease permeated everything. The office itself was sparse, functional, and cluttered, much like the man himself. Kieran, his sandy brown hair thinning, chewed on a matchstick, his tired gray eyes appraising Sully with a professional disinterest that was almost insulting. Another desperate mark, Kieran drawled, leaning back in his creaky chair. Thorne's trail is a long one, Sullivan, and it is littered with people like you, and people like me for that matter. Sully laid out the case, not just his own story, but the wider pattern Eleanor had revealed, the names Chloe was now digging into, the digital web Lena was starting to unpick. He told him about Finn, about the community feeling Thorne's insidious pressure. He presented it as a systemic problem, not a personal one, a threat to the very fabric of Blackwater. Kieran listened, chewing on his matchstick, his gaze fixed on some point beyond Sully's shoulder. He did not interrupt, did not comment. Sully finished, letting the heavy silence fill the room. So, what is your angle, Sullivan? Kieran finally asked, his voice flat. Revenge, justice. Are you planning to break the law to catch him? Because I cannot be a part of that. My badge may be gone, but I do not cross that line. Justice, Sully said, his voice unwavering. And if it means outsmarting him, playing his own game, I will do it. But clean. Eleanor knows his methods inside out. Lena can track his digital shadows. Chloe can expose him to the light. Finn knows this town like the back of his hand. I just need someone who knows how to move in that shadow world without becoming part of it. He looked at Kieran directly. Someone who understands how men like Thorne operate beyond the law, but can still play within it enough to catch him. Someone who has seen this play before and wants to make sure it ends differently this time. Kieran was silent for a long time, the only sound the faint hiss of fryers from downstairs. He flicked the matchstick into a nearby waste bin. I had a case years ago, high-profile fraud, similar modus operandi. Thought I had him. The evidence was ironclad, but it dissolved. Political pressure, buried documents, the whole 9 yards. He rubbed a faint scar above his eyebrow. It cost me my career. The man walked free. He looked at Sully, a glimmer of something akin to grim recognition in his tired eyes. You think you can actually get him? A blue-collar rig worker and a bunch of amateurs. We are Blackwater people, Kieran, Sully said, leaning forward. We know how to fix things when they are broken, and Thorne broke this town. We are going to fix it. Kieran let out a humorless laugh. Blackwater ingenuity. All right, Sullivan, I will give you this much. Your story and the way you have connected the dots, it is not just a fishing tale. It has got a hook. He stood up, walked to a battered filing cabinet, and pulled out a map of Blackwater. Tell me where this Eleanor thinks he is hiding his operations. The real ones, not the shiny fronts. That evening, a disparate group of people gathered for the first time in the quiet, discreet back room of the Anchor Hold. Astrid Lindholm's community center, a place that now served a double purpose as a nascent, clandestine base. Eleanor, true to her nature, remained unseen, but her presence was felt in the meticulous notes Sully held. Chloe spread out a large format printout of Blackwater, marking areas of unusual financial activity gleaned from old council records and local chatter. Lena sat hunched over a laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard, already sifting through what she had found about the Gilded Front's digital backend. Finn, seated in a worn armchair, listened, occasionally interjecting with a gruff comment about local families or movements around the docks. Kieran, ever the cynic, merely observed, arms crossed, his gaze missing nothing. Sully stood at the head of the table, a strange sense of purpose settling over him. He was not a leader by trade, but he had a vision now, a sense of direction given to him by a leaner, and these people, each brilliant in their own way, were following. "All right," Sully said, his voice rough but resolute, drawing everyone's attention. "Alina has given us the patterns. Lena is starting to map the digital trails. Chloe is digging into the local victims, and Finn has given us eyes and ears on the ground. Kieran, you're going to help us connect it all, show us how to move in this game. Thorne has built a web, and we have all felt a strand of it. Now we are going to unravel the whole damn thing." The air in the room, once heavy with individual burdens, now pulsed with a shared, determined energy. The silence was not one of despair, but of focused intent. The pieces were starting to fit, and the picture that emerged was more insidious, more dangerous, and more widespread than Sully had initially imagined. It was time to pull the threads. They needed to understand the full scope of Thorne's operations, to map his entire predator's web before they could even dream of setting a trap. The anchor hold, usually a sanctuary of quiet empathy, thrummed with a new, focused energy. The air, typically thick with the comforting scent of brewing coffee and old paper, now carried a faint tang of Lena's energy drink and the crisp, clean edge of a leaner's determination. Sully stood at the head of the battered communal table, scarred from years of local craft nights and tea mornings, his gaze sweeping over the faces gathered there. Kieran, stoic and observant, Finn, grumbling but present, Chloe already scribbling furiously in her notebook, and now a leaner poised like a hawk, ready to dissect. "Right," Sully began, his voice still a little rough but now infused with a nascent authority. "We know what Thorne is. A leaner, you said he leaves a trail. Financial breadcrumbs. Where do we start looking?" Alina Vance adjusted her spectacles, the network of fine lines around her eyes deepening. She did not look at Sully directly, her gaze fixed instead on a half-empty mug of cooling tea. "Marcus Thorne is a ghost in the machine. He operates through layers, shells within shells. His genius is not just in charming his victims, but in making his illicit gains appear legitimate, or simply disappear." Her fingers, stained faintly with ink, tapped a rhythm on the tabletop. "The initial point of contact for many, including your wife, Sully, was the Quiet Anchor Retirement Advisory. That is where the local rot began. But to understand the full scope, we need to go back further." She pushed a stack of meticulously organized folders across the table. "These are public records, bits and pieces I have gathered over the years. Unconnected until now. Property transfers, business registrations, shell companies named after Greek gods and obscure constellations, all leading back to Blackwater but always through intermediaries. My suspicion is his earliest financial maneuverings here would have required some physical record, something filed with the local authorities." "The old registry," Kieran murmured, leaning forward, a matchstick between his teeth. "Dusty place. Nobody goes there anymore." "Exactly," Alina affirmed, a rare, thin smile gracing her lips. "Lena, your digital ghost hunt is critical, but sometimes a real ghost hunt, through paper and dust, yields the most solid evidence." He started small here. He would not have foreseen the need for flawless digital obfuscation in Blackwater years ago. There will be physical paperwork, old deeds, property records, business licenses. The old registry is where Blackwater's official memory resides. Lena Volkov, hunched over a tablet, barely registered the instruction. Her pale gray eyes, framed by her glasses, darted across the screen. "I have already mapped Thorne's obvious digital footprint. High-end lifestyle blogs, obscure art investment forums, a few defunct crypto ventures. It is all presentation. But his operational footprint, that is where the real juice is. He has got multiple fronts here in Blackwater. The Gilded Front, that shiny new commercial complex by the docks. Supposedly a hub for local entrepreneurs. I have found some unusual traffic patterns on their shared network. And the Sovereign's Retreat, the boutique inn. Very high-end, very discreet. Their guest Wi-Fi is a sieve, but their internal network is locked down tight. Too tight for a simple inn. I will need to get closer. Alina nodded, picking up a pen and circling a few names on a map of Blackwater spread across the table. The Gilded Front, the Sovereign's Retreat, these are his playgrounds, where he cultivates new marks, grooms his image. He will use their systems for secure communications, for managing his local operations. He trusts physical security more than digital, usually, but even his digital operations will leave a ghost in the machine if you know where to look. And I know a ghost when I see one, Lena said, her voice dry, a flicker of something almost like excitement in her eyes. But I cannot just hack into active business networks from here, not without getting flagged. Chloe has been sniffing around those places too, Sully interjected. She is hearing stories, people who invested in new ventures at the Gilded Front, then lost everything. Small business owners, local fishermen whose families put up collateral. She has got the human stories, the victims. Precisely, Alina confirmed. Thorne preys on aspiration. He identifies vulnerabilities, then offers a vision of success too good to refuse. The financial patterns I have seen globally, they begin with a similar hook. Small, legitimate-looking investments, gradually escalating. He uses the allure of wealth, but also the aspiration of being part of that world. With a plan in place, Alina set off for the old registry. The building was a relic, a testament to Blackwater's slow, unhurried past. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, illuminated by shafts of weak sunlight filtering through grime-coated windows. The ground floor was a sparse, hushed public records office, a solitary clerk behind a thick pane of glass, lost in a cross-stitch. Alina, however, headed for the upper floors, a realm of forgotten importance. She navigated a labyrinth of creaking staircases and silent corridors, each step raising a puff of ancient dust. The first floor housed a public records room, its heavy iron-framed shelves groaning under the weight of decades of Blackwater's history. Marriage certificates, birth records, and most importantly for Alina, property deeds, business registrations, and local planning applications. It was a painstaking analog process. No search engines here, just index cards, microfilm readers that hummed like ancient spirits, and her own sharp intellect. She started with the Quiet Anchor Retirement Advisory, tracing its official ownership back. It had been a local, reputable firm, family-owned for decades, before a series of complex, seemingly innocuous corporate restructuring events. Alina meticulously cross-referenced names, dates, and addresses. She found subtle discrepancies. A proxy company registered with an address that was merely a post office box in another town, signed off by a director whose name appeared on a dozen other seemingly unrelated filings across the region. Each discrepancy, a whisper of Thorne. Hours blurred into a methodical dance of retrieval, reading, and note-taking. She uncovered a small marine logistics company that had suddenly changed hands 5 years ago, its assets undervalued. A local fishing cooperative that had secured a mysterious loan from an offshore entity, then struggled under impossible repayment terms. Individual land purchases, aggregated over time by various holding companies, hinting at a larger future development. It was like watching a spider spin its web, thread by invisible thread. Thorne was not just conning individuals. He was subtly shifting the very economic foundations of Blackwater, piece by insidious piece. She finally found a series of interlinked property deeds related to the renovation of the Gilded Front and the establishment of the Sovereign's Retreat, two of Thorne's current, most visible fronts. The ownership structures were deliberately convoluted, a maze of shell companies. But at the very bottom, buried deep within a seemingly mundane environmental impact assessment from 3 years prior, was a signature, Marcus Thorne. Not his usual elegant scrawl, but a hurried, almost careless initial. It was a careless slip, a ghost in the machine of his own meticulous planning. A pattern confirmed. The cold anger in Alina, dormant for years, now simmered with renewed purpose. Meanwhile, in the makeshift operations room at the anchor hold, Lena was a blur of focused intensity. Her custom-built rig, a stark contrast to the old building's decor, hummed with power. Multiple monitors displayed cascading lines of code, network topology maps, and real-time data streams. All right, Gilded Front first, she muttered to herself, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Public network is garbage. Too many bots, too much noise. Their internal network, though, they are running an outdated firewall for a place that handles so much new money. Amateur hour. She began probing, not a brute force attack, but a delicate, almost surgical exploration of their digital perimeter. She bounced through several anonymizing proxies, each one a digital shield against detection. The Gilded Fronts network, while supposedly secure, had a handful of common vulnerabilities she exploited. It was not about theft, it was about observation. She needed to map their communications, identify their regular users, and, critically, find any encrypted data streams leading out of the building. The internal server logs were a goldmine. She saw a specific IP address consistently accessing sensitive financial documents, always using a private, encrypted VPN. The user account associated with it, Morrow. Isabel Morrow, Lena said aloud, the name now a tangible entity. Thorne's executive assistant, works at the Gilded Front, highly organized, accesses everything. Lena pulled up social media profiles for Isabel, finding a meticulously curated online presence. Sharp business attire, motivational quotes, occasional photos with Thorne at glamorous events. She is ambitious, thinks she is climbing the ladder, probably does not know what she is really facilitating. Lena shifted her focus to the Sovereign's retreat. This was a tougher nut to crack. Reese Sterling, the owner, was meticulous, even in his digital security. But Lena knew that human element was always the weakest link. She scanned for unsecured devices connecting to their internal network. A smart speaker, a few personal phones of staff members who had not updated their security settings. Nothing she could exploit for direct access, but enough to create a map of their network traffic. She found a specific secure tunnel, always active, linking directly from the penthouse suite to an external, untraceable server. This was Thorne's personal lifeline, his digital red phone. Encrypted, deep, but not invisible. "I cannot get into it from here," Lena reported later, showing Sully and Alina her findings on a large monitor in the ops room. "Not without a physical presence, but I can monitor the traffic. Volume, frequency, destination. I can tell you when he is talking and how much data he is moving. It is like knowing someone is sending a letter, even if you cannot read the contents." Alina leaned closer, pointing at the Morrow user logs. She is the key to his local operations, his front-facing legitimacy, and she is in deep. He trusts her with the details. The focus shifted to Thorne's broader financial machinations, the grander scale that Alina knew too well. She had a contact, a woman of principles, burned by the periphery of Thorne's type before, now operating independently. Margaret Laurent ran her independent insurance adjusting firm from a sleek, minimalist office overlooking the Blackwater estuary. Her world was one of numbers, contracts, and irrefutable facts. A complex maritime insurance claim had recently landed on her desk, a relatively small Blackwater marine logistics vessel, damaged in what was reported as an unforeseen navigational hazard. Arthur Jenkins Company. On paper, it was straightforward. But Margaret, with her sharp, assessing gray eyes, saw the faint tremor beneath the calm surface. The claim forms were filled out with meticulous, almost excessive detail, but certain elements jarred. The valuation of the cargo, for instance, seemed inflated for a local run. And the ownership of the cargo itself was a convoluted mess of offshore holding companies, familiar to Margaret from other, more suspicious cases she had handled in larger cities. One name, almost buried in the paperwork, caught her attention. Aegis Global Holdings, LLC, a company she had briefly come across in a high-value art fraud case she had investigated years ago. A case where the main perpetrator had, coincidentally, vanished without a trace. She began digging, not just into this claim, but into other seemingly minor maritime incidents in the region over the past year. A fishing boat lost in a sudden squall, its insurance payout suspiciously swift. A small shipping container misplaced during transfer from a larger vessel, its contents vaguely described but highly valued. Each case on its own was insignificant. Together, they painted a pattern. Financial manipulation using maritime assets, laundered through obscure companies. Margit cross-referenced her findings with publicly available shipping manifests, port authority records, and even local weather reports. The unforeseen hazard that damaged Arthur Jenkins' boat. The weather report for that day indicated clear skies and calm waters. The captain's testimony, while plausible on its own, started to fray under Margit's relentless scrutiny. She spent days, fueled by strong coffee, building a meticulous case, a web of interconnected, seemingly disparate incidents that all pointed to the same orchestrator, Marcus Thorne. His name, while not overtly present on most documents, subtly appeared in the shadows of the paper trail, a company he held shares in, a law firm he frequently used, a specific offshore bank account mentioned in a subsidiary's financial report. He was using Blackwater's working docks as a discreet conduit for asset manipulation, preying on struggling local businesses like Arthur Jenkins to facilitate his larger schemes. The evidence was irrefutable, yet intangible enough to evade casual detection. She knew she could not take this to the local police. It was too complex, too subtle, too easily dismissed as unfortunate business dealings. She needed someone who understood the granular details, someone who was not afraid to chase shadows. A week later, Elinor found herself, once again, sitting in Sully's makeshift command center at the Anchor Hold, a stack of freshly copied documents at her elbow. The old registry provided the foundations. He has been consolidating assets, manipulating local industries. The Mariners Guild Hall, for example. The benevolent trust is being slowly bled dry, its properties quietly acquired by shell companies Thorne controls, under the guise of heritage restoration. Lena interrupted, pulling up a real-time feed from a discreet camera she had managed to place near the entrance of the gilded front. And here is our girl, Isabel Morrow. Notice how she carries herself, always perfect, always a little anxious. The camera zoomed in slightly as Isabel, impeccably dressed, exited the building, a pristine tablet clutched in her manicured hands. She paused, checked her watch, and subtly adjusted the collar of her tailored blazer, her professional smile not quite reaching her deep brown eyes. She is a cog, a very efficient cog, but she is under pressure. And she is meticulously documenting everything for him, either knowingly or not. She handles all his local logistics, all the paperwork Elinor is tracing. Just then, the outer door of the Anchor Hold creaked open, and Kieran Doyle entered, a grim satisfaction on his face. Behind him, looking wary but determined, was Margit Laurent. "Elinor, Lena," Kieran said, his voice flat but firm, "meet Margit Laurent, independent insurance adjuster. She has been doing her own digging into some unusual maritime claims. Claims that, would not you know it, all lead back to our friend Thorne." Margit nodded curtly, her gaze sweeping over the eclectic setup, taking in the whiteboards covered in flowcharts and red string. It is a pattern of asset fraud, discrepancies in valuation, convoluted ownership, claims that do not align with documented environmental conditions. He is using maritime incidents to launder money or dispose of problematic assets. Arthur Jenkins' company is just the latest victim being squeezed. Elinor's eyes finally met Margit's, a flicker of respect passing between them. "So you have seen the threads then, too. The manipulation of genuine loss for illicit gain." Margit laid a slim, impeccably organized folder on the table. "Thorne's network is not just digital or financial. It is physical. Boats, cargo, properties. He has integrated himself into Blackwater's infrastructure, not just its high society. He is everywhere." Sully stepped forward, a thoughtful expression on his face. "He is a predator, all right, and he is good at it. Makes everything look legitimate, makes people want to believe. But we have got his playbook now, do not we? Elinor, you have given us the financial patterns. Lena, you are mapping his digital ghost. Margit, you are showing us how he is using the very fabric of this town, its docks, its businesses. And Chloe is getting the stories of the people he has crushed." He looked around the room at the diverse group assembled. "But if we are going to catch him, we cannot just watch. We need to get into his world. Make him believe we are one of his own. We need bait. We need a performance." He glanced down at his rough, calloused hands, then up at Elinor. "I cannot walk into the Sovereign's retreat looking like an oil rigger who just lost everything." Elinor, sensing the shift, nodded slowly. No, Sully. To truly catch the spider, you have to become a fly he is desperate to ensnare. A very specific, very wealthy, and very alluring fly. Her gaze hardened, a calculating glint in her eyes. It will require a complete transformation. She paused, then added, almost to herself, a new skin. The implications hung in the air, a silent acknowledgement of the daunting, yet exhilarating, task ahead. Sully, the blue-collar rig worker, was about to step into a world of bespoke suits, refined etiquette, and psychological warfare. He would need more than just information. He would need to become a meticulously crafted illusion. The next phase of their battle would not be fought with brute force, but with a carefully orchestrated act of deception. The cold logic of a leaner Vance, delivered with her characteristic clipped precision, cut through the clamor of Sully's grief-fueled rage like a surgeon's scalpel. Marcus Thorne preys on aspiration, Mr. Sullivan. Not just wealth, but the desire for it. He sells a dream, a lifestyle. You, as you are, represent the antithesis of that dream. Sully shifted in the utilitarian chair in Astrid's consultation room, a space within the anchor hold that was fast becoming their command center. The faint scent of chamomile tea and old paper hung in the air, a stark contrast to the diesel and salt he was used to. He glanced at Kieran Doyle, whose tired gray eyes seemed to assess him with a familiar, weary cynicism. "What is that supposed to mean?" Sully's voice was rough, unaccustomed to such delicate pronouncements. His calloused hands, still ingrained with the phantom grime of the rig, clenched. Kieran leaned forward, resting his elbows on the chipped formica table. "It means, Sully, that you look like a man who just spent 3 weeks wrestling a rogue pipe in the North Sea. Which, no disrespect, you are. Thorne does not deal with men like that. He deals with men who fund men like that, or men who pretend to. To get close to Thorne, to get him to bite on this bait, Eleanor and Margit are cooking up," Eleanor continued, her gaze unwavering. "You need to be a chameleon. You need to be a mark, yes, but a very specific kind. One he respects, one he wants to exploit. You need to shed your skin, Mr. Sullivan." The words grated. Sully had spent his life building a reputation on honest work, on his unvarnished self. Now he was being asked to become a lie. He looked down at his hands, then up at Eleanor. "How far?" Kieran offered a rare, thin smile. "All the way, mate, all the way." The first stop on Sully's arduous journey into artifice was the Velvet Thread, Vivienne Dubois' vintage clothing and curios shop. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged fabric, lavender, and a faint, indefinable sweetness. Every surface seemed to shimmer with history, feathered boas draped over antique mannequins, glittering brooches nestled in velvet, racks of impeccably preserved gowns whispering tales of forgotten soirees. Vivienne herself was a masterpiece of curated eccentricity. Her faded auburn hair, shot with theatrical purple streaks, framed piercing emerald eyes that missed nothing. She moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, her silk blouse rustling softly. She peered at Sully over the rim of gold spectacles, an expression of polite disdain on her face. "So, the good doctor and the former detective believe I can turn a lump of coal into a diamond, do they?" she mused, picking up a silver locket and turning it in her fingers. "Or at least, make coal sparkle for a very particular audience." Sully felt a familiar prickle of defensive anger. "They think you know how to make someone seem like someone else." Vivienne's lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. "My dear Mr. Sullivan, we all do that every day. Some of us are simply better at the performance, and some, like your Mr. Thorne, turn it into an art form, a very destructive one." She walked slowly around Sully, her eyes raking over his sturdy jeans, faded work shirt, and sensible boots. Rough edges, authenticity perhaps, but in Thorne's world, authenticity is just another weakness to be exploited. She paused, her gaze locking with his. "You carry your pain like a heavy cloak. He will see that. He will use it." A knot tightened in Sully's stomach. He had barely spoken a word about Sarah, about the wound that still bled inside him. Yet Vivienne saw it, felt it. "So, what do I do?" "We begin by giving you a new cloak," she said, her voice softer now, almost empathetic. "A new skin. But the real work, Mr. Sullivan, is not in the clothes. It is in the wearer. It is in the conviction of the lie." Their sessions at the Velvet Thread were less about clothing and more about posture, gesture, and the subtle art of conversation. Vivienne had Sully practice walking, sitting, holding a champagne flute, an empty one initially to keep his fisherman's hands from crushing it. She taught him to make eye contact not as a challenge, but as a silent appraisal. He learned to listen, truly listen, to the unspoken cues, the hidden agendas behind casual pleasantries. Thorne, Vivienne explained one afternoon, demonstrating a slight tilt of the head, a dismissive flick of the wrist, is a master of social engineering. He reads people like open books. He will look for your tells, Mr. Sullivan. Any flicker of anger, insecurity, or a lapse in your chosen persona. Every movement must be deliberate, every word measured. Sully, awkwardly mimicking a confident, relaxed stance, felt like a puppet. It feels fake. Vivienne laughed, a melodic, knowing sound. Of course it does. All performance is fake, my dear, but the goal is to make the fake feel true to the audience. Thorne is your audience, and he is a very discerning, very dangerous critic. From Vivienne, Sully went to Julian Finch at the Fine Line. The tailor's shop on a quiet, cobbled lane was an antidote to the velvet thread's bohemian clutter, a sanctuary of pristine order and understated luxury. The scent of fine wool, leather, and Julian's exquisite cologne filled the air. Julian, immaculate in a bespoke tweed suit, initially regarded Sully as a minor affront to his aesthetic sensibilities. "Mr. Sullivan," Julian said, his voice as smooth and precise as his tailoring shears, "Vivienne informs me you require an entire re-envisioning." He gestured to Sully's work-worn attire with a slender, manicured hand. "We are not simply dressing you. We are crafting a statement, a narrative. You are to be a man of discerning taste, cultivated wealth, and an effortless air of command. A man Thorne would wish to emulate, or more accurately, to exploit." Sully stood stiffly as Julian circled him, measuring tape dancing around his frame, his keen gray-green eyes assessing every angle. Julian lectured him on fabric weights, the cut of a lapel, the subtle art of a Windsor knot. Sully endured endless fittings, the heavy silks and cashmere feeling alien against his skin, the tailored lines constricting. He felt the phantom itch of his old work clothes, the freedom of movement he had taken for granted. "The quality is not merely for show, Mr. Sullivan," Julian explained patiently, pinning a sleeve to exact perfection. "It is for conviction. The way the cloth hangs, the subtle give of the weave, it imbues confidence. It makes you believe the lie even subconsciously, and if you believe it, so will Thorne." One afternoon, Julian held up a perfectly tailored suit, a rich charcoal wool with subtle pinstripes. "This, Mr. Sullivan, is your armor. It speaks of power, of a quiet, unshakable authority. A man who has seen the world, conquered it, and now merely observes its lesser mortals." He then produced a pair of highly polished, handmade leather Oxfords. "And these are your foundations. Never underestimate the footwear. It tells more than you know." Sully looked in the mirror, a stranger staring back. The man there was lean, formidable, but polished, sophisticated. He barely recognized himself. The transformation was unsettling, a shedding of decades of identity. Julian, observing his expression, offered a rare, almost imperceptible smile. "Good. Discomfort is the first step towards transformation. You are no longer just John Sullivan. You are a projection, and it must be flawless." At the anchor hold, Astrid Lindholm's psychological conditioning was the hardest. In her empathetic yet keenly analytical office, Sully was forced to confront the raw wounds of betrayal. The warm, inviting ambience of the haven, typically a sanctuary, became a crucible for his emotions. Astrid, with her penetrating gray eyes and quiet strength, made him revisit Sarah's note, the empty house, the crushing financial ruin. "Thorne will push your buttons, John," Astrid explained, her voice calm and steady. "He thrives on finding and manipulating weaknesses. Your anger, your grief, these are liabilities in his world. We need to acknowledge them, understand them, and then compartmentalize them. Not suppress them, but control them. Make them work for you." Sully found himself reliving the darkest moments, his jaw tight, his hands clenching under the table. Astrid patiently guided him, using breathing exercises, visualization techniques, and probing questions that peeled back layers of anger to expose the hurt beneath. She taught him to identify his own physical tells, the flicker in his eye, the slight tremor in his voice when a memory surfaced, the subtle clenching of his jaw. "These are your tells, your vulnerabilities," she said, holding up a mirror for him, both literal and metaphorical. "You must become a blank slate, or rather a canvas where only you decide what is painted. Thorne plays on the presumption of truth. We will give him a truth he expects, not the one that truly exists." Sully practiced responding to emotionally charged questions with an impassive face, a measured tone. He learned to channel his simmering rage into a cold, calculated focus. It was exhausting, a constant battle against his own instincts. But with each session, he felt a subtle shift. The white-hot anger began to crystallize into a colder, harder resolve. He was no longer just a victim, he was an instrument. The most jarring, yet in some ways most cathartic, part of Sully's training took place at the ironclad lair. Declan Riley, the stoic former operative, had transformed the abandoned WWII bunker into a utilitarian training ground. The air was damp and cold, heavy with the scent of concrete, salt, and diesel from the humming generator. Declan, lean and powerful, with intense gray-blue eyes, spoke in clipped, economical sentences. He did not bother with pleasantries. "You are going into a viper's nest, Sullivan. You think you are smart enough to outwit Thorne with pretty words? You get in trouble, pretty words will not save you. You need to handle yourself." He taught Sully basic self-defense, blocks, evasions, how to use his body weight, how to generate force. Sully, years removed from the physical demands of the rig, found the exercises brutal, but Declan pushed him relentlessly. He practiced against dummies, then against Declan's own padded forearms, the impacts jarring his bones. "Not about fighting most times," Declan grunted after a particularly rough session, wiping sweat from his brow. "It is about knowing you can fight, changes how you stand, how you look, how you react. Thorne will have eyes, he will have muscle. You need to project strength, even when you are standing still." Declan also drilled Sully on situational awareness, scanning a room, identifying exits, noticing discrepancies in a crowd. He showed him how to move discreetly, how to blend into the periphery, how to observe without being observed. The bunker's labyrinthine corridors became their training ground, echoing with the thud of fists and the rasp of Sully's labored breathing. Sully, bruised and exhausted, found a strange release in the physical exertion. It was a tangible, honest kind of pain, a counterpoint to the psychological torment. Declan, watching Sully's unwavering determination, a quiet fire in his eyes that matched his own, felt a grudging admiration. This was not a man seeking vengeance out of weakness. This was a man forging himself into a weapon, piece by painful piece. Back at the anchor hold, the team assembled to see the culmination of their work. Sully walked in, not in his usual clothes, but in a bespoke charcoal suit that flowed effortlessly over his frame. His hair was meticulously styled, no longer just a practical crew cut, but a carefully sculpted statement. His hands, though still large, now held a glass of water with an almost unnatural ease. Vivienne gave a small, approving nod. "Remarkable, the canvas is prepared." Julian, ever the perfectionist, adjusted an imaginary crease on Sully's lapel. "Flawless, a genuine work of art." Astrid watched Sully's face. The lines of raw grief were still there, etched around his eyes, but they were now subtly contained, a quiet reservoir of intent. His gaze was steady, unreadable, radiating a new, strategic confidence. "His tells are under control," she murmured, a flicker of professional satisfaction in her gray eyes. "He is ready." Kieran merely grunted, a sound of approval. Declan, from his silent spot by the door, just watched. He knew the fight that had been forged in Sully, knew the steel beneath the silk. Sully looked at their faces, then at himself reflected in the glass of the window, seeing not a ghost of his old self, but a new man. A stranger, yet one deeply familiar. He was John Sullivan, foreman, but also something else entirely. A man designed to hunt a predator in his own glittering jungle. "So," Sully said, his voice calmer, deeper than before, "what is the bait?" Elinor stepped forward, a faint, almost vengeful gleam in her piercing blue eyes. "Thorne's greatest weakness, Mr. Sullivan, is his ego, his need to possess what is truly, uniquely valuable. We have just the thing to tempt him." She unrolled a large, detailed drawing on the table, an antique maritime chart, exquisitely rendered, but with a subtle, unmistakable flaw that only a true connoisseur like Elias Montgomery would create, and only a predator like Thorne would overlook. It was a masterpiece of deception, designed to ignite Thorne's deepest greed. "It is time to send out the siren's call." The new Sully nodded, a cold resolve settling over his features. The game was truly about to begin. The scent of damp concrete and diesel fuel, a familiar comfort now, filled John Sully Sullivan's lungs. It was a stark counterpoint to the subtle, expensive colognes Julian Finch had taught him to identify, and the cloying sweetness of the high-end wines Reese Sterling insisted upon. Weeks of rigorous training, of shedding the calloused skin of an oilman and donning the intricate, bespoke uniform of a high-value mark, had left him feeling different. Not less himself, but more sharpened. The raw edges of his grief and rage had been burnished into a cold, focused resolve. He ran a thumb over the polished wood of the conference table, a salvaged ship's hatch cover now serving as their tactical hub in the ironclad lair. "All right, team," Sully said, his voice deeper, more measured than it once was, a subtle art Vivienne Dubois had drilled into him. He met each gaze around the table, Alina's piercing blue, Lena's intense gray, Kieran's tired but sharp, Declan's stoic, and even Elias Montgomery's fastidious hazel, currently peering at a digital schematic on a tablet. "We have built the cage. Now we need to put the bird in it. Thorne's greedy, we know that. He is vain, meticulous, and he believes he is the smartest man in any room. That is how we hook him." Alina tapped a finger on a holographic projection of a financial flow chart, intricate as a spider web. "His most consistent weakness, beyond simple avarice, is the need for validation. He desires not just wealth, but recognition for his superior intellect, his curated taste. He collects not merely assets, but trophies. The more complex, the more authentic, the provenance he can dismantle or redefine, the greater his satisfaction." "Which brings us to the bait," Sully said, turning to Elias Montgomery. The antique restorer, impeccably dressed even in the damp confines of the bunker, cleared his throat. He adjusted the spectacles perched low on his nose, his fingers, usually stained with polish or varnish, now pristine. "Our artifact, Mr. Sullivan, must be seductive," Elias began, a flicker of something almost theatrical in his usually stoic eyes. "It cannot merely be valuable. It must be unique, a challenge. Something a man like Thorne, who sees himself as a connoisseur of the truly rare and the subtly manipulated, would find irresistible. A piece with a history he would yearn to uncover, and then, perhaps, rewrite." He then projected a detailed image onto the screen. A small, intricately carved wooden box, no larger than a cigar humidor, crafted from what appeared to be dark, ancient bog oak. Its surface was adorned with swirling Celtic knotwork, inlaid with tarnished silver. Atop it sat a miniature silver-plated compass, its needle frozen, pointing west. "This," Elias continued, his voice resonating with quiet pride, "is a replica of the legendary North Star casket, a mythical navigational aid said to have belonged to a Viking chieftain, lost to the North Sea a millennium ago. The original, of course, is pure legend. This replica, however, is painstakingly crafted. The bog oak is genuinely ancient, sourced from a peat bog in the Outer Hebrides. The silver is authentic, period-appropriate. The compass, a masterwork of miniature engineering, appears to be an impossible anomaly for its supposed age." Sully stared. Even his uncultured eye could see the meticulous detail. "But it is a fake." Elias offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "An unparalleled counterfake, Mr. Sullivan. Its provenance, which Alina has meticulously crafted with a network of discredited historical documents and a series of accidental digital breadcrumbs, suggests it was recently salvaged from a deep-sea wreck off the coast of Norway. The discovery, naturally, was suppressed, the item quietly acquired by a reclusive but undeniably wealthy individual who understands its true esoteric value. An individual, such as yourself, in your new guise." Alina added, "The historical evidence of the North Star casket is just fragmented enough to tantalize Thorne, just ambiguous enough to allow his ego to fill in the gaps. He will see it as a chance to legitimize a piece of untold history, to be the one who brings a legend to light. Or, more likely, to acquire it through dubious means, and then use his narrative to inflate its value, further cementing his reputation as a master manipulator of perception. Sully nodded slowly. So, the story needs to be just as good as the fake. Precisely, Elias confirmed. The craftsmanship must scream authenticity, while the narrative hints at a provenance so improbable, so perfectly aligned with his own self-image as a man who transcends the ordinary, that he cannot resist. The disdain Elias usually held for anything less than genuine was now repurposed, a razor-sharp tool in their deception. He was committed to creating a perfect lie to expose a greater one. All right, the bait's set, Sully said, looking around. Next step, where do we dangle it? Reese, your place is the most exclusive game in town. Thorne's a regular. We need him there, interacting with me, where he feels comfortable, powerful, and utterly in control. The team had moved from the bunker to the back room of the anchor hold, where Reese Sterling, looking decidedly uncomfortable amidst the mismatched furniture and faint scent of disinfectant, sat stiffly. He was a man of pristine surfaces and quiet authority. Sully's request, delivered during a clandestine meeting over lukewarm coffee, clearly chafed against his meticulous sense of order. "Mr. Sullivan," Reese said, his voice even, yet with an edge of steel. "The Salted Spoon is a sanctuary of quality. My reputation, my life's work, is built on discretion and an unwavering commitment to a certain standard. To use it as a stage for a deception, however noble, is profoundly against my principles." His gaze drifted to a small smudge on the wall, a clear affront to his sensibilities. "I get it, Reese," Sully responded, softening his tone, remembering Astrid's lessons on empathy. "And I respect that. This is not a pub brawl. It is a surgical strike. Thorne is slowly rotting Blackwater from the inside, Reese. He is twisting the meaning of quality, of genuine value, just like he twists people's lives. Your sanctuary might be impeccable now, but how long until his shadow falls over it too?" Sully leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You see him, do not you? The way he looks at your staff, your patrons. He is always assessing, always looking for an angle, a weakness. He is not appreciating the quality, he is wondering how to exploit it. He owns a piece of your business, Reese. A piece you do not even know about, through a dozen shell companies, just like he did with a dozen other honest folk in this town. If we do not stop him, your sanctuary becomes his trophy." Reese's perfectly groomed facade did not crack, but the tension in his jaw tightened. He knew. Everyone who truly saw Thorne knew. The chef considered Sully, a man so recently a rough diamond, now polished to a high, unsettling sheen. He saw the genuine fire in Sully's eyes, a reflection of the integrity Reese himself cherished. "And what would you require?" Reese finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "A private event," Sully explained. "Small, exclusive, a curated guest list. You set the menu, you handle the ambience. We handle the guest of honor. I need a single, uninterrupted interaction with Thorne, just long enough for him to get a taste of the bait and of my new persona." Reese paused, his gaze fixed on some distant point only he could see, perhaps envisioning the meticulous planning required, the subtle manipulations of his own staff, the breach of his carefully curated bubble. "Very well," he said, the word a reluctant exhalation. "But everything must be flawless and discreet. My name, my establishment, they cannot be sullied by this man's eventual public downfall. Only his and his alone." It was a concession, a commitment to a higher integrity, even if it meant a temporary dive into deception. With Reese on board, the team's planning intensified. The logistics of moving the artifact, a meticulously crafted wooden box, were delicate. It needed to appear to arrive from a prestigious, yet subtly untraceable, source. That is where Arthur Jenkins came in. Sully found Arthur at the title exchange, amidst the cacophony of the fish market. The air was thick with the smell of brine, diesel, and fresh catch. Arthur, stoic and weathered, was overseeing a crane swing a net of gleaming mackerel from a trawler onto the dock. His shoulders were stooped, but his movements were still strong and precise. "Arthur," Sully greeted, leaning against a stack of empty crates, his new, bespoke suit feeling out of place but deliberately chosen to project a subtle authority Thorne would recognize. Arthur barely glanced at him, grunting. "Sullivan, fancy threads, lost your way to the casino." Sully chuckled a practiced, confident sound. "Just expanding my horizons, mate. Heard you are still the best for a discreet transport. I have got a sensitive piece coming in. Antiquity, you understand. Needs to move from the docks through customs and straight to a secure location without a whisper. High value, high discretion. Off books, naturally. Arthur finally turned, his stormy gray-blue eyes assessing Sully. Off books, eh? That will cost you. And what kind of antiquity needs that much quiet? He was gruff, but Sully could see the flicker of interest. Arthur's business had been suffering from the same shadowy corporate squeeze that Thorne represented. A little extra cash for a discreet, high-value job would be welcome, especially if it did not smell too fishy. A private collection, Sully said vaguely, tapping the side of his nose. Something someone wants to keep out of the headlines for now. Very old, very fragile, requires special handling. He named a figure that made Arthur's eyes widen slightly. Arthur scratched his chin, his gaze drifting to the dilapidated ledger house, a symbol of Blackwater's forgotten past. Special handling, then. I have got a small freighter coming in next week from Lerwick. Can offload it quiet. And for the storage, he paused, his gaze lingering on the ledger house. The old ledger house basement still got some solid rooms. Empty, too. Discreet access from the rear alley. He was unknowingly pointing to one of Thorne's less visible, yet crucial, storage hubs, a detail Lena had identified as a potential staging ground. Sully suppressed a smile. Thorne, with his layers of shell companies, would not connect a rough, honest logistics man like Arthur to the newly refined Sully. Perfect, Arthur. Just make sure it is handled with care. And I need a few more pieces of freight handled, a small collection of custom display cases, some specialist lighting. High-end stuff for a private viewing. Nothing too obvious, just delicate. Arthur nodded. Consider it done. Always preferred working with straight talkers, even if they are getting into the fancy game. He did not trust the suits, but he trusted a man who still spoke the language of hard work, even if he dressed like the enemy. His grudging assistance, driven by necessity and a flicker of loyalty to a local, was exactly what the team needed. Meanwhile, Carla Rossi, at Scissors and Secrets, provided a different kind of intel. Her salon was a hub of Blackwater's social currents, and she had been an unwitting witness to Thorne's insidious charm and Sarah's gradual transformation. Sully, on Aliner's advice, had visited for a style consultation, a necessary part of maintaining his new persona. He has got a way about him, Marcus does, Carla mused, snipping expertly at Sully's temples, reshaping his hair into the precise, fashionable cut Julian had prescribed. Smooth, always compliments the cut, even when Sarah looked like she had been dragged through a hedge backward before she met him. Sully watched her reflection in the mirror. Sarah changed a lot, did not she? Carla nodded, her dark brown eyes meeting his in the reflection, filled with a quiet sympathy. Oh, I used to be so grounded. Then all the flashy clothes, the trips, she would come in talking about business opportunities and investments. She always seemed a bit breathless, like she was trying to keep up. She paused, lowering her voice. And lately, even before things went south, she looked tired. Haunted, even. Not the woman who used to laugh so freely in my chair. And Thorne, Sully prompted carefully. Always in a rush, but never too rushed to stop and chat up Mrs. Henderson or offer a tip to young Liam who sweeps up. Plays the benevolent rich man. But his eyes, Carla said, leaning in closer, her voice conspiratorial. His eyes are always watching. Calculating, he never really listens, He just waits for his turn to speak. And he always checks his phone. Subtle, but I notice everything in here. It is like a second skin, that phone. He treats it like a limb. Sully stored the observations away. Thorne's performance, the subtle cracks in Sarah's facade, the omnipresent phone, a crucial detail for Lena. Carla's empathy, her genuine care for her clients and community, made her a perceptive, invaluable, informal asset. She did not know the full scope of their plan, but she felt the insidious presence Thorne had become in Blackwater. Finally, back at the ironclad lair, the team gathered for the final briefing. The atmosphere was charged with nervous energy and focused intent. Lena's monitors glowed, displaying a complex web of surveillance feeds, schematics of the salted spoon, and encrypted communication channels. Declan stood by the entrance, his posture coiled, ever vigilant. All right, Sully, your entrance, Lena said, pointing to a CCTV schematic of the salted spoon's opulent foyer. Reese's staff will ensure Thorne is already present in the main lounge. You will arrive discreetly. A few minutes to settle in, survey the room. Then the introduction. Reese has chosen a moment during the dessert course. He will lead Thorne to your table, ostensibly to discuss a rare vintage. Alina, you and I will be monitoring Thorne's private communications from here. Any change in his patterns, a sudden flurry of messages, we flag it immediately. Declan, Sully said, turning to the former operative. You will be moving through the venue, low profile. Keep eyes on Thorne, but more importantly, keep eyes on me. Any sign of trouble, a tale, an uninvited guest, you extract me. No heroics, just clean exfiltration. Declan nodded, a silent promise. Understood. We will have a secure comms channel open, low frequency. A single word, Sully, and I move. Sully looked at Elias, who gave a faint nod of approval. The bait was flawless. He looked at Alina, whose quiet intensity was a wellspring of intellect. He imagined Reese, meticulously ensuring every detail was perfect at the salted spoon. And Arthur, unwittingly ferrying the very tools of Thorne's downfall. Carla, with her salon full of whispered truths. This is it, Sully said, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his unlikely allies. We have got the plan. We have got the bait. I have got the suit. Time to put the blue-collar logic to work on a gilded fraud. He took a deep breath, the scent of diesel and old concrete grounding him one last time. Tomorrow, John Sully Sullivan would cease to exist. A new man, a wealthy, discerning Mark, would walk into the salted spoon, and Marcus Thorne, predator of Blackwater, would be looking at his next, most lucrative target, utterly unaware he was staring into the jaws of a trap of his own making. The crisp North Sea air, usually a familiar balm on Sully's skin, felt like an alien pressure as he stepped from the sleek, dark sedan. It was not Kieran behind the wheel this time, but a local livery driver, an anonymous cog in the meticulously constructed illusion. The sovereign's retreat loomed before him, a stately Georgian manor clinging to a rise, its ivy-clad stone facade gleaming under the late afternoon sun. Warm light spilled from its tall, leaded windows, a stark contrast to the rough, honest glow of the oil rigs or the humble lamps of his old Blackwater home. Every polished surface, every manicured hedge, screamed of the very world Marcus Thorne inhabited, a world of curated perfection, where appearances were paramount and authenticity a luxury. Sully smoothed the lapels of his custom-tailored charcoal suit, a masterpiece of Julian Finch's art. The fabric, a subtle blend of cashmere and merino, felt impossibly soft, a second skin far removed from his usual oil-stained overalls. He moved with a practiced ease, a blend of Vivienne's elegant posture and Astrid's centered breathing techniques. Slow, steady, observe everything, reveal nothing. His gut clenched with a familiar tremor, a ghost of the raw rage that had driven him for months, but he pushed it down. This was not John Sullivan, the grieving rigger. This was Mr. Sullivan. John Sullivan, a man of quiet, considerable means, a connoisseur of forgotten treasures, and now a hunter in a wolf's clothing. He presented his invitation at the heavy oak door. The doorman, impeccable in livery, barely glanced at the embossed card before ushering him into a grand foyer. The air within was thick with the scent of fine spirits, polished wood, and expensive perfumes. A low murmur of sophisticated conversation drifted from the Salted Spoon gastropub, mingling with the subtle clinking of crystal. He saw Reese Sterling, the proprietor, a lean, watchful figure, supervising his staff with an almost surgical precision, his gaze sweeping the room before briefly, almost imperceptibly, acknowledging Sully. A flicker of apprehension in Reese's sharp eyes, a reminder of the quiet bargain they had struck. Sully moved with the deliberate pace Vivienne had taught him, neither too eager nor too aloof. He navigated the elegantly dressed crowd, a tableau of Blackwater's new money and Thorne's usual clientele. He caught glimpses of perfectly coiffed women, their laughter a little too bright, and men whose suits were as sharp as their predatory smiles. This was the stage, and he was the lead actor. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing the obvious power brokers, searching for the true target. There, by the polished mahogany bar, holding court with a small circle of admirers, stood Marcus Thorne. He was exactly as Sully remembered from their brief, infuriating encounters, charismatic, effortlessly elegant, a predator in a bespoke suit. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his smile a practiced, almost hypnotic curve. And beside him, slightly in his shadow, was Isabel Morrow, her sleek dark hair pulled back, tablet clutched in hand, a picture of professional competence, yet something about her eyes seemed just a shade too anxious. Sully subtly adjusted the lapel of his jacket, ensuring the antique fob watch, Elias Montgomery's masterpiece of meticulously fabricated provenance, caught the ambient light just so. It was not a family heirloom. It was the bait, a relic of Blackwater's forgotten maritime past, supposedly recovered from a sunken privateer, uncatalogued, historically significant, and impossibly rare. Its story, woven by Elias and polished by Vivienne, was a siren song for Thorne's particular brand of avarice. He drifted towards a quiet corner, near a display of antique maritime maps, feigning interest. He let a snippet of conversation, carefully rehearsed, fall from his lips to a passing waiter. Remarkable cartography. One does not often see such uncatalogued pieces outside of private collections, almost as rare as an untouched navigator's sextant from the Dutch Golden Age. I hear the Van der Velde collection had a similar piece, though the provenance was disputed. It was a delicate maneuver, a whisper of a hint, designed to pique the ears of anyone with a taste for the rare, and more importantly, the illicit. Thorne, a master of observation himself, would notice. He waited, sipping a glass of rare scotch that Julian had insisted he learn to appreciate. The taste was complex, peaty, far from the familiar bitterness of his own working man's beer. He felt like a fraud, yet the performance had to be flawless. He will not underestimate you if you do not underestimate him, Astrid's voice echoed in his mind. He thrives on the predictable. Be unpredictable in your sophistication. Across the room, Isabel Morrow, ever vigilant, noticed the new arrival first. She had scanned the guest list earlier, a name she vaguely recognized, John Sullivan. A local, she thought, perhaps from one of the fishing cooperatives, now seemingly different. His name usually conjured images of rough hands and faded work clothes, but this man moved with a quiet confidence, his suit bespoke, his gaze discerning. He did not gawk, he observed. When he spoke to the waiter, his voice was low, educated, dropping a casual reference that pinged a very specific keyword Thorne had mentioned recently. Isabel, meticulous by nature, filed away the observation. Thorne, in mid-sentence, paused, his head cocked subtly, as if sensing a shift in the room's energy. His eyes, sharp and predatory, locked onto Sully for a fleeting second, then dismissed him. Not a mark yet, but a potential. This was it. Thorne, ever the maestro, did not approach immediately. He let the seed of curiosity germinate. He finished his conversation, offered another charming smile, then gracefully disengaged, moving with an unhurried confidence that suggested he had all the time in the world. He moved to the bar, positioning himself near Sully, ordering another drink. "A fine choice," Thorne remarked, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, a perfectly calibrated blend of casual warmth and underlying appraisal. "Glenmorangie, is it? Only a connoisseur understands the subtle notes of a rare single malt." Sully turned, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Indeed, though I find true value often lies not in the widely lauded, but in the uncatalogued, the truly unique, much like the spirit itself, perhaps." He gestured vaguely to the room. He did not offer his name. Thorne had not offered his. The dance had begun. Thorne's eyes, even as they held a polite, engaging expression, were assessing, probing. "A fascinating philosophy, mister." He left the question hanging, a delicate invitation. "Sullivan, John Sullivan," Sully replied, extending a hand. His grip was firm, not overly aggressive, but hinting at a hidden strength. "And you are?" "Marcus Thorne," he said, taking Sully's hand, his smile widening almost imperceptibly as their fingers met. "Pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mr. Sullivan. I confess I overheard your comment earlier. Uncatalogued treasures. You have a keen eye, I presume, for such things." "A fascination more than an eye," Sully demurred, a hint of self-deprecation that Vivienne had coached. "My family has a modest appreciation for history, particularly maritime. Old maps, navigational instruments, things that tell a story beyond their perceived value. He paused, letting the implication hang. The kind of stories that often get lost in the noise of the market. Thorne's gaze sharpened, a barely perceptible flicker of genuine interest overriding his practiced charm. Lost stories. Yes, those are often the most intriguing. The ones with the greatest potential, would not you agree? Sully met his gaze, holding it steady, recalling Astrid's words. He will look for weakness for a tell. Control your breathing, hold your center. Potential, certainly, Sully replied, a hint of a challenge in his voice, but also the greatest risks. One must be discerning, Mr. Thorne. Many claim to uncover lost treasures, but few possess the true eye for authenticity. The provenance, as they say, is everything. He subtly touched the fob watch in his pocket, a silent, almost involuntary gesture. Thorne's gaze followed the movement. Indeed, authenticity, a rare commodity these days, perhaps even more so than the treasures themselves. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. I myself dabble in such ventures, curating collections, restoring legacies. It is a passion, truly. A pity so many true gems are lost to obscurity, or worse, to those who lack the vision to truly appreciate them. Sully allowed a small, knowing smile. Vision is indeed a gift, and a necessary weapon in this particular landscape. He paused, letting the bait fully sink. I recently came across a piece that, well, it certainly spoke to my fascination. A rather unique navigator's sextant, unlike anything I have encountered. Its journey, if you could only imagine the waters it has crossed. A profound history, Mr. Thorne, yet its origins remain, for now, tantalizingly undocumented. He kept the details vague, the value implied, the mystery compelling. He did not need to specify. The notion of an uncatalogued, historically rich, high-value maritime artifact was enough for Thorne. Thorne's interest was now unmistakable, though still cloaked in his effortless cool. A subtle tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible shift in his posture. Undocumented, you say? A rare find indeed, the kind that reshapes narratives. Perhaps we could discuss this fascination of yours further, Mr. Sullivan. I find myself quite intrigued. He pulled a sleek, silver card case from his inner jacket pocket, his movements fluid, practiced. My card. If you would be so kind as to afford me a moment of your time, perhaps over a more private discussion. I often host discreet gatherings at the Alchemist's Salon, a space dedicated to such historical rediscoveries, you understand. Sully took the card, his fingers brushing Thorne's. The card was heavy, embossed, understated luxury. The Alchemist's Salon, an evocative name. He tucked it into his own pocket, a gesture of casual acceptance. I would be delighted, Mr. Thorne. History, after all, deserves its due, as do the stories that accompany it. As Thorne turned to rejoin Isabel, who had been observing with a careful, almost analytical stillness, Sully felt a strange thrill. The bait had been taken. Miles away, in a nondescript panel van parked discreetly on a hill overlooking the Sovereign's retreat, Lena Volkov's fingers danced across her keyboard. Multiple screens glowed, displaying a dizzying array of data. Network traffic, encrypted messaging apps, social media feeds, and a live, subtly blurred audio feed from the gastropub's ventilation system, painstakingly tapped by Declan days earlier. She had watched the entire interaction, Sully's carefully controlled posture, Thorne's predatory charm. A flicker of Thorne's expression, the way his eyes lingered on Sully's pocket. Then, the almost instantaneous surge in network activity. He is taking the bait, Lena murmured, her voice tight with focused intensity. Her pale gray eyes, usually reserved, now burned with a fierce, quiet triumph. Thorne just pinged his inner circle. Encrypted comms, the kind only the Cornerstone Club network allows. He is already searching for a John Sullivan with a maritime interest, cross-referencing high-value uncatalogued assets. Her fingers flew, tracking the data. He is trying to verify Sully's fabricated persona, establish his legitimacy. The Alchemist's Salon invite is legitimate, but the follow-up will be thorough. A low voice crackled in her earpiece. Good, stay on it. Keep an eye on Isabel Morrow, too. She is watching Sully like a hawk. It was Declan Riley, his voice a steady anchor. Inside the Sovereign's retreat, Declan, dressed in a borrowed waiter's uniform, moved with a quiet efficiency, clearing empty glasses near Thorne's group. He watched Isabel Morrow's subtle reactions. She had been observing Sully with a peculiar intensity, a flicker of something beyond professional curiosity in her deep brown eyes. Clever girl, Declan thought, his gaze unblinking. Isabel was sharp, meticulous. She was logging everything, perhaps not understanding the full implications, but her instincts were clearly picking up on the nuances. He had seen it before, the first crack in a carefully constructed facade, not on the mark, but on the manipulator's most trusted pawn. He saw Thorne lean down, speaking to Isabel, a low, quick instruction. Isabel nodded, her gaze briefly flickering back to Sully, a new, almost analytical curiosity in her eyes. Declan knew what that meant. Thorne was already putting her to work, trying to dig up dirt to find the angle. Good. Let him. The more he dug, the deeper he'd bury himself in their carefully laid trap. Declan moved away, disappearing into the kitchen, his mind already running through potential contingencies. The night was young, and the game had just truly begun. Sully had hooked the shark. Now came the hard part, reeling him in. Sully stepped back out into the cool Blackwater evening, the hum of the sedan's engine a welcome sound. He exhaled slowly, a long, controlled breath, the persona peeling away like a layer of exquisitely tailored skin. The energy he had spent, the mental strain of holding true to Vivienne's teachings and Astrid's psychological armor, was immense. But the flicker in Thorne's eyes, the invitation to the alchemist's salon, it was all real. He had done it. He took the bait, did not he? Kieran's gruff voice came from the driver's seat, a knowing smirk in his tone. He had been listening in on Lena's feed. Sully leaned back, a genuine, tired smile finally gracing his lips. Hook, line, and sinker, Kieran. He thinks he has found a new opportunity. He thinks he has found me. The word tasted strange, both bitter and exhilarating. Lena has already got his network lighting up like a Christmas tree, Kieran confirmed, turning the car onto a quieter street. Isabel is on the case too. Thorne is trying to vet you. She even sent a query through the Cornerstone Club's private channels. Very subtle, very him. Sully closed his eyes, picturing Isabel's anxious, intelligent face. He wondered if she already felt the first subtle pangs of unease, the first cracks in the gilded illusion Thorne had woven around her. A potential unwitting ally, indeed. Good, Sully said, opening his eyes and looking out at the familiar, honest streets of Blackwater. The fight was not just for him anymore. It was for every person like Isabel, every forgotten victim. He felt a strange power, not of wealth or status, but of purpose. He was no longer just a man consumed by revenge. He was a carefully crafted instrument of justice, honed to perfection. He looked at Thorne's card in his hand, then out the window. The alchemist's salon, a place where truth was twisted and sold as illusion. He had no doubt Thorne would continue to pursue his investment opportunity with a growing, calculated enthusiasm. The next steps would be even riskier, even deeper into Thorne's web. But for the first time in a long time, Sully felt ready. He had stepped into the lion's den, and the lion had bitten. Now he just had to make sure the venom worked. The scent of aged whiskey and polished leather still clung to Sully's skin, a lingering ghost of the sophisticated performance he had just given. He wiped a bead of sweat from his temple, despite the cool air of the ironclad lair, and ran a hand through his impeccably styled hair, Julian's latest masterpiece. He bit, Sully reported, his voice rougher than his new persona, back in the safety of the bunker's main chamber. Hard. The old man practically salivated over that provenance Elias cooked up. Eleanor, hunched over a spread of printouts and old maps, gave a curt nod. Predictable. Marcus always chases the unique, the untraceable. It is not just the value, it is the narrative, the story behind the acquisition that feeds his ego. Her piercing blue eyes, usually shaded with cynicism, held a flicker of grim satisfaction. Story is about to get a whole lot less flattering for him, Lena muttered from her console, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards. Her corner of the bunker, a glow-in-the-dark nerve center, hummed with the quiet whir of servers and the focused intensity of her work. He is ramping up. My initial probes show a surge in encrypted communications, both incoming and outgoing, since your little chat at the Horizon Lounge. He is already consolidating data, probably thinking you are a goldmine. Thorne's immediate escalation was exactly what they had hoped for. Just 3 days after their initial, calculated encounter at the Horizon Lounge. A bespoke invitation arrived via encrypted email, delivered with Thorne's signature blend of casual opulence and implied exclusivity. The Alchemist's salon it read, a private viewing of unseen acquisitions at the Old Natural History Museum, followed by an intimate discussion about Sully's supposed rare maritime chart. Sully stepped into the Alchemist's salon feeling like an imposter in a meticulously constructed play. The cavernous, high-ceilinged wing of the museum, once home to dusty dinosaur bones, had been transformed. Sleek glass display cases, illuminated by dramatic spotlights, held objects that shimmered with an almost otherworldly gleam. Ancient bronze artifacts, jewel-encrusted manuscripts, and what Thorne claimed was a fragment of a Roman shipwreck. The air, typically thick with the smell of old stone, now carried notes of expensive perfume, polished wood, and the faint, sweet scent of exotic flowers. It was all a performance, a glittering stage for Thorne's latest deceptions, and Sully, the blue-collar rigger, was playing the part of a discerning, cash-rich investor. Thorne, in a flawlessly tailored suit Julian would have critiqued for its very perfection, moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a conductor. He greeted Sully with a warm, firm handshake, his smile a well-practiced masterpiece of charm. "Mr. Sullivan," he purred, his voice a low, resonant hum. "I trust you are enjoying the collection, a little passion project of mine to preserve true history away from the prying eyes of the uninitiated." Sully forced a smooth, confident smile. "Impressed, Mr. Thorne, truly, though I prefer history you can feel, not just admire behind glass." He gestured vaguely at a particularly ornate ceremonial dagger. "Raw, real, not just curated." Astrid's words echoed in his head. "He values authenticity in others as a means to dissect them. Show him your real passion, not your polished facade." Thorne's eyes, sharp and assessing, twinkled. "Ah, the discerning eye, I appreciate that. A true connoisseur knows that value is not merely found in the shine, but in the story. The provenance, which brings us to our discussion, does not it?" He guided Sully to a private viewing chamber, a soundproofed, velvet-lined alcove away from the polite murmur of the other guests. Inside, a single antique map lay under a soft, directional light on a pedestal. It was the bait, the carefully aged and expertly crafted forgery Elias Montgomery had overseen. Sully's fabricated backstory painted him as a quiet collector, a man who, despite his humble origins, had a deep, almost instinctual connection to the North Sea's hidden treasures and the financial means to acquire them. He spoke of an ancestor, a long-lost whaler, whose journals mentioned such a chart. Thorne circled the map, a predatory glint in his eye. "Exquisite," he murmured, picking up a loop. "The paper, the ink, the subtle water damage, it speaks of generations. And the details, those currents, those forgotten reefs. Truly a masterpiece of cartography. And if your story about your family's journals is to be believed, it is a map to a very particular kind of treasure." He looked up, his gaze locking onto Sully's. "I am prepared to make a significant offer, Mr. Sullivan. But first, tell me, why now? Why sell something so personal?" Sully had rehearsed this. He leaned back, affecting a casual weariness. "Legacy, Mr. Thorne. My wife Sarah always wanted a quiet life, a simpler life. Money for her the way she wanted it. This map, it has been in the family for too long. A burden almost. Time to cash it in for her, for us." The lie tasted bitter, but it was effective. Thorne understood the narrative of a man seeking to provide, to secure a future for a loved one. It mirrored the very weakness he exploited in others. Thorne's smile softened, becoming almost empathetic. "A noble pursuit, Mr. Sullivan. Family, legacy. I understand completely. Let us arrange a more formal meeting at my office at the Gilded Front. I have some resources that might ensure this legacy is handled with the utmost discretion and profitability." Sully nodded, suppressing a shiver. He was deep in the lion's den now. Miles away, at the desolate Siren's Perch lighthouse, Lena Volkov battled a different kind of predator. The wind howled off the North Sea, rattling the windows of the old keeper's residence, a stark contrast to the quiet hum of Thorne's hidden servers in the reinforced basement below. She was tucked away in a hastily prepared position in the adjacent cliff face, a thermal cloak draped over her, her laptop a constellation of green and blue light in the encroaching dusk. Her mission: infiltrate Thorne's high-security communications array perched atop the lighthouse. Thermal scans clear for perimeter breach. Declan's clipped voice came through her earpiece. Wind is a bitch, though. Careful with the drone. Lena acknowledged with a grunt. The micro-drone, barely larger than her palm, was her eyes and ears, designed to exploit the smallest structural weaknesses. She had spent days mapping the lighthouse's ancient blueprints, cross-referencing them with satellite imagery and the faint electromagnetic signatures she had picked up. Thorne, arrogant in his isolation, had integrated cutting-edge tech into a century-old structure, but he could not entirely erase history. The drone zipped silently across the turbulent air, its tiny camera feeding Lena a live stream. It navigated around external sensors Declan had already mapped, finding its way to a narrow, corroded ventilation shaft near the apex. "Internal access confirmed," she whispered, her breath fogging on the cold air. Inside, the drone snaked through the dark, damp shaft, a digital explorer in a forgotten world. Eventually, it emerged into the disused lantern room, a circular chamber where the massive Fresnel lens, cracked and lifeless, still stood sentinel. Here, amid the salt-stained glass and rusted brass, Thorne had installed his communications hub, a sleek black server rack glowing with an eerie blue light, bristling with antenna and fiber optic cables. It was a digital fortress, powered by a hum that resonated deep within the ancient stone. Lena's fingers danced over her keyboard, a flurry of commands. She deployed a custom-built, miniaturized data siphon, a stealthy USB device that latched onto the server's external port, a digital ghost in the machine. "Initial handshake successful," she murmured, a flicker of triumph in her pale gray eyes. "Firewall detected. Adaptive countermeasures active. Thorne has got good people, or he is paying a fortune for off-the-shelf military grade." The minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. Lena felt the digital resistance, the algorithms fighting back, trying to identify and repel her. She had to be fast, precise. Thorne would not leave this open long. Bypassing encrypted comms, routing through a dummy server, spoofing authentication protocols. Then a cascade of green text across her screen. Access granted. She was in. She worked quickly, systematically. Encrypted data streams, offshore account ledgers, a contact list filled with coded names and international numbers. A trove. She found evidence of a network far more extensive than they had first imagined, stretching across continents, touching everything from art dealings to maritime logistics. There were even fragments of messages hinting at vulnerabilities in local Blackwater institutions, the Mariners Guild Hall, the old registry, ripe for acquisition. Thorne was not just a con artist. He was an economic insurgent, dismantling institutions from within. "Got it," she breathed, leaning back, the tension draining from her shoulders. "His global network, his offshore accounts, key contacts, it is all here. Siren's perch is compromised." She began the meticulous process of exfiltrating the data, knowing that every second risked detection. The roar of the sea outside seemed to applaud her victory. Thorne's office at the Gilded Front was a study in controlled elegance, a stark contrast to the bustling, glass-fronted complex outside. Polished concrete floors, minimalist art, a large, almost entirely empty mahogany desk. He sat behind it, radiating an air of calm authority as Sully took a seat opposite. Today, Thorne's usual charming glint was edged with a subtle tension Sully had not seen before. He kept glancing at a tablet, his thumb rubbing its polished edge with a nervous energy that belied his smooth demeanor. "The chart, Mr. Sullivan," Thorne began, leaning forward, his voice a low purr. "It is remarkable. My experts have corroborated its historical significance, and if your family lore holds true, the potential treasure it leads to, well, it is astronomical." He paused, letting the word hang in the air like a promise. "I am prepared to offer you $5 million. Tax-free, of course, routed through an offshore account entirely clean." Sully maintained his persona, a man of simple needs but unexpected wealth. $5 million for a map, bit steep for a family heirloom, do not you think? He had to push, make Thorne believe he was a challenge, not just an easy mark. Astrid had warned him. He loves the chase. He needs to feel he has outmaneuvering you, that he has earned his conquest. Thorne chuckled, a low, confident sound. "My dear Mr. Sullivan, some treasures are worth far more than their face value. They represent control, opportunity. You, a man of the sea, must understand that the greatest fortunes are often hidden, not in plain sight. His gaze was intense, but Sully noticed his eyes flick once more to the tablet. Just then, a discreet knock on the door. Isabel Morrow, Thorne's executive assistant, entered, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her face an unreadable mask of professional deference. She carried a slim file. "Marcus, a moment, if you please. Urgent. Mr. Sterling's office is calling again, and there is a rather insistent reporter from the Blackwater Beacon." Thorne's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Chloe Davies," he hissed, not quite under his breath, but enough for Sully to catch it. He waved Isabel away with a dismissive hand. "Later, Isabel. Mr. Sullivan and I are discussing a very important acquisition." Isabel hesitated, a flicker of anxiety in her eyes, then nodded and retreated, closing the door softly. But as she turned, her gaze met Sully's for a fleeting second. In that instant, Sully saw it, a subtle shift in her polished composure, a barely perceptible widening of her eyes, a silent tremor. She hesitated for a fraction longer than necessary before closing the door, leaving it ajar just a hair. Thorne, however, was already back to his performance. "Forgive the domestic interruption, Mr. Sullivan. Women can be rather emotional about financial matters. Now, where were we?" He picked up his tablet, swiping aggressively. The shift in his composure was palpable. Chloe's articles, no doubt, were chipping away at his fortress, and Sarah's unexpected appearance, her palpable disdain for his world, had clearly rattled him. Back at the anchor hold, the weight of the day settled on Sully. He recounted the interactions to Alina, Astrid, and Declan, the vivid details of Thorne's arrogance, Lena's successful infiltration, and the gut-wrenching sight of Sarah. "Chloe's pieces are having an effect," Alina observed, tapping a copy of the Blackwater Beacon. The headline read, "Local businesses, vanishing dreams, a pattern of misfortune in Blackwater." It did not name Thorne directly, but it drew unsettling connections to high-profile newcomers and dubious investment opportunities. "He is feeling the heat. Sarah's reaction confirms it. He is not as impenetrable as he pretends." Astrid nodded, her gaze empathetic yet analytical. "Sarah is experiencing cognitive dissonance. The fantasy Thorne sold her is eroding. Her attempt to subtly warn you, John, suggests a desperate desire to break free, or at least to absolve herself. It is a weakness, but also a dangerous wildcard." "A wildcard we can use," Declan stated, his voice devoid of emotion but his eyes intense. "He is distracted, vulnerable. Lena's intel from the Siren's Perch is golden. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, names and numbers that link directly to his larger operations. It is all there." Lena, patching in from the ironclad lair, projected a complex web of financial transactions onto the wall screen. "His operational funds are spread across dozens of accounts, but they all funnel through a few key conduits. And these names, some are legitimate figures, high-stakes investors. Others are pure aliases. He is running a global shell game." Sully stared at the swirling data, the faces of Sarah and Thorne flashing in his mind. The personal had collided violently with the professional. "He wants the map," Sully said, his voice hard. "He is going to make a move to finalize this. He will think he is closing the trap, but we will be one step ahead." "Exactly," Alina affirmed. "We use his predictable patterns. His greed for this specific artifact, the need to legitimize its value within his alchemist salon narrative. We let him think he is dictating the terms, but we dictate the location, the timing, the witnesses." Astrid stepped forward, placing a hand on Sully's arm. "You have shown immense strength, John, but Sarah's presence will challenge you. You need to channel that emotion, not suppress it. Use it as fuel. He wants to see you break. Do not give him the satisfaction." The team began to work, a focused hum of collective intelligence. Lena dissected the offshore accounts, mapping the flow of illicit wealth. Alina cross-referenced the names against her own archival data, building a comprehensive victim list. Declan began to plan extraction routes, contingency plans for every possible scenario. They needed to force Thorne's hand, to make him consolidate his assets in a way that would expose his entire global network. They needed a stage where he would proudly display his ill-gotten gains, believing he was untouchable, only for it all to come crashing down. The siren's call had lured Thorne, but it was Blackwater's reckoning that awaited him. The gilded cage was tightening, and the next move would be Sully's. They would give Thorne his treasure, but it would be a Trojan horse. All that remained was to choose the final battleground, the ultimate audacious gambit. The air inside the connoisseur's vault was as cold and sterile as a surgical theater, a stark contrast to the thrumming, organic chaos of the North Sea that Sully knew so intimately. Polished concrete walls gleamed under the precise beam of hidden lights, reflecting the high-value art and curated trophies that Marcus Thorne had amassed. Each piece, from the rare coin collection to the abstract paintings, felt less like art and more like evidence, meticulously catalogued triumphs over human vulnerability. Sully stood at the center of it all, a man in a bespoke suit that still felt alien, a phantom limb compared to his calloused hands. His gaze was fixed on Thorne, who sat, legs crossed in a minimalist leather chair, a glass of amber liquid cradled in his hand, a predatory smirk playing on his lips. "So, Mr. Sullivan," Thorne drawled, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence, "you have certainly made a nuisance of yourself. Impressive transformation, I must say. Julian does excellent work, does not he? Almost makes you forget the rough edges, the crude origins." Sully felt the familiar heat of old rage flicker, but Astrid's training held it in check. He was a performance now, a meticulously crafted lure. "Crude origins, Thorne, tend to build things that last, unlike your house of cards." His voice, honed by Vivienne, was low, calm, laced with just enough ice to convey controlled fury. "The deal. We finalize it here. Now." Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Impatient, are we? Always the worker bee, are not you, Sully? Always eager to finish the job. But in my world we savor the moment, especially when it is the grand finale." He gestured vaguely around the room. "Look around, Sullivan. This is the culmination of vision, of understanding human desire. What you see is wealth, yes. But more importantly, it is proof of mastery." Outside, nestled amidst the rolling, inland hills, Declan Riley was a ghost in the twilight. His breath plumed in the cold air as he lay prone in the high grass, night vision goggles sweeping the estate. The connoisseur's vault was a fortress, but no fortress was impenetrable, not when you knew its architect's weaknesses. Isabel's schematic, delivered with a trembling hand, had been critical. Declan mentally walked through the exterior security grid, identifying the blind spots, the pressure plates that Lena had already found a way to spoof, the thermal cameras he had disabled with strategically placed low-tech reflectors. He confirmed the external comms jammer was active, isolating the vault from external contact. He adjusted his earpiece, Lena's voice a crisp whisper. "Perimeter secure, Lena. Your window is open. 5 minutes until I draw their attention." Miles away, in the secure, humming ops room of the anchor hold, Lena's fingers flew across her keyboard, a blur of motion in the dim, blue light of multiple screens. The air smelled of caffeine and warm electronics. Isabel's intel had provided the master key, an old, slightly convoluted system architecture diagram from Thorne's early network design, thought long obsolete, but surprisingly still a foundational layer for his cutting-edge systems. It was the crack in the armor. She had bypassed the outer firewalls, the biometric server room lock a distant memory thanks to a leaked admin code. Now, she was deep within the vault's internal network, a digital phantom navigating a maze of encrypted files. "The main ledger is heavily fragmented," Lena muttered into her headset, her pale gray eyes narrowed in fierce concentration. "He built layers of dead ends, but I am seeing a pattern, a nomming convention for specific transaction IDs. It matches Aliner's theories about the victim logbooks." Her screen pulsed with lines of code, a digital current racing through Thorne's carefully guarded secrets. Aliner, seated beside her, nodded, a silver locket clutched in her hand. Her own screen displayed a cross-referenced list of Thorne's early victims, meticulously compiled over years. "He always dehumanized them, Lena, reduced them to data. Look for the anomalies, the ones with a personal identifier beyond mere financial loss. He always kept trophies, even digital ones, for the conquests that gave him personal satisfaction, the ones who challenged him." Her voice was tight with a cold anticipation she rarely allowed herself to show. Back in the vault, Sully's heart hammered a rhythm against his ribs, but his face remained a mask of controlled disdain. This is not about mastery, Thorne. It is about fraud. This art you have acquired, these investments you peddle, they are built on stolen lives. My life. Sarah's life. Thorne laughed again, a harsh, humorless sound. Sarah, oh poor, sweet Sarah, always so easily swayed by a grander vision. She was a malleable asset, Sully, nothing more. She traded a drab future for a gilded one willingly. You mistake her ambition for innocence. He took a slow sip of his drink. As for your stolen life, that is merely the cost of doing business, a regrettable externality for the truly ambitious. Sully felt a fresh wave of disgust. And all your victims are just externals, are they? The old woman who lost her pension, the young couple who invested their life savings in your phantom schemes, the countless others, nameless to you, whose futures you devoured to build this monument to your ego. Precisely. Thorne's eyes, devoid of warmth, glittered with intellectual arrogance. They lacked foresight, resilience. It is the natural order, Sullivan. The cunning prey on the weak. I simply expedited the process. He paused, his gaze hardening. But you, Sullivan, you have been a stubborn insect, and now you are trapped in the spider's web. Thorne subtly pressed a button on the armrest of his chair. A faint, almost imperceptible click echoed in the room. Outside, Declan saw the corresponding flicker on his internal thermal scan, Thorne's hidden security detail, roused from their discreet positions. He has made his move, Lena. 5 hostiles converging on the main entrance. Got it, Lena's voice crackled. I am bypassing his primary data core now. His victim logbooks, they are real, and they are extensive, hundreds of entries. She was siphoning terabytes of data, each file a shattered life. Her fingers froze for a split second. Eleanor, there is a subdirectory marked Vanguard Projects. Within it, a file labeled Vance E and a single image, a scanned newspaper clipping from 18 years ago. Eleanor gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound. Her long-held breath escaped in a shaky sigh. Her fingers flew to her screen, pulling up the file Lena indicated. The grainy image materialized, a newspaper headline, financial analyst accused of insider trading. Below it, a younger, distraught face framed by accusations. Her face. And next to it, a small, almost imperceptible symbol, a unique glyph Thorne sometimes incorporated into his forged documents, a signature of his artistry. That is it, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The proof, the direct link to my frame-up, he kept it, as a trophy. Years of quiet anguish, of a life derailed and a name tarnished, coalesced into this single digital confirmation. The vindication, when it came, was not joyous but a profound, chilling sense of validation. He had not forgotten, and neither had she. Back in the vault, Thorne rose, a cold smile on his face. You played your part well, Sullivan, the disgruntled investor, the vengeful cuckold, but you are out of your depth. My security will escort you out. Gently at first, then less so. Sully stood his ground, a rock in the polished space. You are wrong, Thorne. I am not playing a part. This is real. This is for every person you ruined, and you are not getting away with it. He tilted his head, a subtle nod. The signal. Just then, from a hidden panel in the wall, a different kind of sound erupted, not Thorne's security, but a guttural cry of frustration. Sarah Sullivan emerged, disheveled, her expensive clothes wrinkled, her face pale and streaked with tears. She had been observing, listening, hidden in Thorne's secure observation room, meant for his own amusement and a place to keep her isolated when he was conducting sensitive business. Isabel's last, desperate act had been to unlock it. Marcus, no, Sarah cried, her voice raw, echoing in the pristine vault. It is true, all of it. He showed me the ledgers, the coded accounts. The names. She looked at Sully, her eyes wide with a horrified comprehension that finally shattered the gilded illusion. The investments, they were all fake, shell corporations. It is a network of lies, Sully. He showed me how he laundered the money through the resort, the art market, everything. The sophisticated veneer Thorne had so painstakingly crafted for her, for himself, cracked and crumbled under the weight of her own words. She had thought she was part of his brilliance, his sophistication. Now she saw she was just another piece of stagecraft, a gilded adornment. Thorne turned, his face contorting into a mask of pure fury, all pretense of charm vanishing. You fool! "You weak, pathetic woman, you will ruin everything." He lunged for her, his eyes burning with a cruel, desperate rage. Before he could reach her, a shadow detached itself from the corner of the room. Declan Riley, who had bypassed the internal security and slipped in unnoticed during the confrontation, moved with frightening speed. One fluid motion, and Thorne was on the ground, his arm twisted behind his back, a chokehold preventing any sound beyond a strangled gasp. Declan's grip was precise, efficient, born of years of combat. "Do not move," Declan said, his voice a low growl, utterly devoid of emotion. "It is over." Thorne struggled, his eyes wild, darting from Declan's impassive face to Sully's, then to Sarah, who cowered, watching her world implode. He looked utterly broken, not by physical force, but by the shattering of his control, the exposure of his meticulously guarded self. Lena's voice, triumphant, burst through Sully's earpiece. "I have it, all of it. The master ledger, the Vanguard projects, the victim profiles, the offshore accounts, the forged documents, Eleanor's file. Everything. It is downloading to the secure server at the Anchor Hold. It is going to take a while, but it is done." Eleanor, her vision still fixed on the image of her younger self, framed by Thorne's deceit, allowed a single tear to trace a path down her cheek. Not of sadness, but of a fierce, silent relief. Justice. Sully looked down at Thorne, pinned by Declan. The arrogance, the sophistication, the charisma, all gone. What remained was a desperate, cruel man stripped bare. Sully felt no joy, no triumph, only a deep, abiding weariness. The personal vengeance had long since evaporated, replaced by a cold satisfaction that justice, however hard one, was finally being served. He glanced at Sarah, who met his eyes, a world of pain and regret reflected in hers. Her journey of reckoning had only just begun. A distant siren wailed, faint but growing. Kieran Doyle and Arthur Jenkins had successfully initiated the diversion, drawing away any remaining external security from the estate, ensuring Thorne's eventual capture by local authorities would not be linked to the team directly. Chloe was poised, her article pre-written, waiting for Eleanor's final confirmation of the data. The trap was sprung. The connoisseur's crumbled empire lay exposed, piece by meticulous, devastating piece. Sully met Declan's gaze. "It is done," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the theatricality he had cultivated. "Time to let the world see the real Marcus Thorne." The clatter of handcuffs was a brittle sound, stark against the sterile hum of Marcus Thorne's shattered command center in the Apex suite. Gone was the effortless charm, the impeccably tailored facade. What remained was a man whose eyes, now devoid of their predatory gleam, simply stared vacant and defeated at the polished granite floor. Two uniformed officers, grim-faced and efficient, flanked him. Thorne did not resist. He simply was not anymore. The air, usually thick with his calculated power, felt thin, hollowed out by the sudden, absolute collapse of an empire built on lies. Sully watched from a discreet distance, a knot loosening in his chest that had been coiled tight for months. There was no joy, not really. Only a cold, deep satisfaction, like the last vibration of a bell fading into silence. He saw Thorne's shoulders slump, the subtle tremor in his hands as they were cuffed behind his back. Lena, a ghost in the periphery, gave a curt nod, her fingers already flying across the interface of a captured drive mirroring data at light speed. Eleanor, just outside the suite, her piercing blue eyes fixed on Thorne's retreating figure, allowed herself a single, almost imperceptible twitch of her lips, a silent vindication that had been decades in the making. The battle was over. The accounting had begun. Days later, the Blackwater Assizes house, usually a somber beacon of local justice, buzzed with an unfamiliar, almost electric energy. The stone walls, usually absorbing every sound, now seemed to amplify the murmurs and the hushed expectations of the crowd that gathered. News crews, drawn by Chloe Davies' initial, carefully vague reports, had descended, their cameras flashing, their microphones bristling, hungry for the story of the con artist brought down by a ragtag group of ordinary citizens. Sully sat in the public gallery, the hard oak bench digging into his thighs. He wore a simple, clean shirt and trousers, his appearance devoid of the bespoke polish Julian Finch had painstakingly applied for the sting. That persona was shed, left behind like a discarded skin. Beside him, Finn O'Connell sat, his gruff demeanor softened by an uncharacteristic stillness. Kieran Doyle was a few rows back, a dark, watchful presence. Proceedings commenced, formal and slow-moving, a stark contrast to the rapid-fire unraveling of Thorne's world. The prosecutor, a sharp-suited woman from a regional office, laid out the charges. She spoke of shell companies, forged documents, asset stripping, and the systematic dismantling of lives. On the defense bench, Marcus Thorne sat. He was dressed in a standard, ill-fitting suit, his hair slightly unkempt. The change was profound. Without the illusion of wealth and charisma, he was just a man. A pathetic man. Sully found his gaze drawn to him. This was the man who had stolen his life, his future, his wife. Yet looking at him now, Sully felt only emptiness. Not hate, not even anger anymore, just a profound sense of waste. He had fought a phantom, a construct of charm and lies. The real man was small, shrunken. Eleanor Vance was called to testify first. Her appearance was meticulous, her voice clear and precise. She detailed with breathtaking accuracy the intricate financial mechanisms of Thorne's schemes. She spoke of the patterns, the indicators she had recognized years ago, the loopholes he exploited. She presented the evidence Lena had extracted, encrypted ledgers, digital communications, financial trails leading to offshore accounts, all meticulously cross-referenced with her own archival research. Her testimony was a masterclass in forensic finance, delivered without emotion, yet with a quiet power that resonated through the courtroom. She concluded with a statement of her own past, how Thorne had framed her, detailing the exact mechanisms, validating decades of silent suffering. A hushed gasp went through the gallery as her personal connection was revealed. For Sully, it was another moment of quiet triumph, not for himself, but for Eleanor. Later, a stream of victims, old and new, took the stand. There was a retired fisherman who had lost his pension, a young couple whose life savings for a home had vanished, a bewildered widow whose inherited antique had been replaced with a worthless forgery. Each story was a fresh wound, a testament to Thorne's callous efficiency. The raw emotion in their voices, the tears, the barely suppressed fury, it all washed over Sully. He was one of them, but also separate, having fought back, having won. This was not just his justice. It was their justice, the hard-won dignity of Blackwater reclaiming itself. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, at the anchor hold, Dr. Astrid Lindholm presided over a different kind of justice. The communal room, usually a quiet space for general support, was now a sanctuary for Thorne's victims. The air was thick with shared pain, but also with the fragile beginnings of understanding and healing. "It is not your fault," Astrid repeated, her voice soft but firm, addressing a small group huddled in mismatched armchairs. A woman, her face etched with despair, clutched a crumpled tissue. "He preyed on your trust, your hopes. He understood human vulnerability better than most, and he exploited it. That is his failing, not yours." Astrid's own journey, from disillusioned academic to quiet warrior, had found its true validation here. The Haven was more than just a support group. It was a psychological shield against the lasting trauma of Thorne's manipulation. She taught them to recognize the patterns, to understand the psychological hooks, to rebuild not just their finances, but their fractured sense of self. She felt the heavy burden of their collective pain, but also the profound satisfaction of watching a flicker of hope return to their eyes. Her purpose, she realized, was not to chase con artists, but to heal their aftermath, to mend the human spirit. Across town, in the small, cluttered office of the Blackwater Beacon, Chloe Davies was a whirlwind of focused energy. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, the screen glowing with the raw, unvarnished truth. The exposé, titled Blackwater Reckoning, the con artist who stole a town's soul, was nearing completion. It was a searing indictment, meticulously researched, brilliantly written, and backed by an avalanche of irrefutable evidence. She had leveraged Lena's digital footprint, Eleanor's financial expertise, Kieran's street-level intel, Finn's local insights, and Sully's harrowing personal narrative. Every shell company, every forged document, every victim's story, it was all woven into a compelling tapestry of Thorne's global criminal enterprise. This was not just a local story anymore. Major national news outlets had already called, eager to run her piece. Chloe paused, taking a sip of cold coffee, her intense hazel eyes scanning the words. She had doubted Sully initially, seen him as a desperate, angry man. But he had proven her wrong, given her a story that transcended local gossip, a chance to truly hold power accountable. This was her victory, not just as a journalist, but as a voice for the community she loved. She hit send, the story now out of her hands, flying into the digital ether, soon to be read by millions. The truth, hard-won and devastating, was finally free. Back in his small, rented room above Arthur Jenkins's marine logistics office, Sully sat alone. The room was sparse, a simple bed, a worn armchair, a small table. It was far from the comfortable home he and Sarah had built, the one he had envisioned spending his early retirement in. The North Sea wind rattled the window pane, a familiar, melancholic sound. There was a soft knock on the door. Sully knew who it was. He had not seen her since the siren's perch, since Thorne's world began its final, irreversible collapse. He opened the door. Sarah stood there, smaller than he remembered, her eyes wide and haunted. The expensive clothes she still wore now seemed to hang on her, a costume ill-suited to her pale, drawn face. Her designer sunglasses, the symbol of her new life, were gone. "Sully," she whispered, her voice rough. He stepped aside, letting her in. The scent of her expensive perfume, once intoxicating, now felt cloying, a memory of a distant dream. She looked around the Spartan room. This is where you are living." It was not a question, but a lament. Sully sat on the edge of his bed. "It is fine. It is honest." Sarah wrung her hands. "I saw him today at the courthouse. He looked broken." She shuddered. "He was talking about me, about how I helped him, how I facilitated everything." Her voice cracked. "He called me stupid, a fool. His words, they sounded like the things he said about all the others, all his marks." Sully remained silent, letting her speak. He had no anger left for her, only a profound sense of loss that felt like an old scar. "He promised me a life, Sully," she pleaded, her voice barely audible. "Everything you could not give me, the travel, the luxury, the excitement. He made me feel seen, important." She looked up, tears brimming. "But it was all fake, all of it. He just needed someone to manage his affairs, to be his pretty face. I was just another asset." Sully finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "And you went along with it." She flinched. "I did not know the full extent at first. He was so convincing. He made it seem like unconventional investments, high risk but legitimate. By the time I started to see the cracks, I was too deep, too scared to leave, too scared of losing everything, of being nobody again." "You chose, Sarah," Sully said, his gaze unwavering. "You chose the lie over the truth, over us, over Blackwater." He felt the pain, sharp and familiar, but it was distant now, a dull ache rather than a burning fire. "I did not lose just the money, Sarah. I lost my future, my reputation, my name, and for a while I lost myself." She looked away, defeated. "I am going to face the consequences, Sully. Whatever they are, I deserve it. I do not know what I am going to do now. I have nothing left." "You have your choices," Sully said, rising from the bed. "And you have to live with them just like I have to live with mine." He paused at the door, the wind whistling outside, pulling at the threadbare curtains. "I wished you well once. I wish you peace now, Sarah, and truth." He opened the door, a silent gesture. Sarah rose, her shoulders hunched, and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing off a chapter, a lifetime. Sully leaned against it, the quiet thrum of the diesel engine from Arthur's shop below a familiar comfort. He closed his eyes. He was drained, yes, utterly spent. The rage was gone, replaced by something much deeper, much more resilient. He had not reclaimed his fortune. That was largely lost to the labyrinth of Thorne's offshore accounts. But he had reclaimed something infinitely more valuable, his dignity, his self-respect. He was still Sully, the rig foreman, the blue-collar man of the North Sea, but he was also more. He had stood against a sophisticated predator, a system rigged against the ordinary, and he had won. Not with money or power, but with ingenuity, grit, and the unwavering belief in a hard-won justice. He looked around the humble room. It was not empty anymore. It was full of quiet strength of purpose. The fight had taken everything, but in doing so, it had given him back himself. He had a path now, not the one he had planned, but one he had forged, hammer and anvil, in the crucible of his own making. The sea beckoned, as it always did, but now the horizon felt different. It was wide open, waiting. The ceaseless cry of gulls, familiar and strangely comforting, carried on the crisp Blackwater air. It had been months since Marcus Thorne's polished empire had crumbled into digital dust and cold steel, since the clamor of the Assizes house had echoed with his conviction. Spring had given way to a glorious, sun-drenched summer, then a riot of autumnal hues, and now the sharp, clean bite of early winter was settling over the North Sea coast. Blackwater was not whole, not yet, perhaps never truly whole again. Scars remained, like the deep gouges on an old trawler's hull, but the bleeding had stopped. A slow, sturdy process of healing had begun, much like the tide's patient return after a storm. John Sullivan, Sully once more, rather than the polished, rage-filled shell of his alter ego, stood on the newly reinforced section of the main dock. He wore heavy-duty work trousers, a thick, faded jumper, and a high-vis jacket that had seen better days. The familiar scent of brine, diesel, and freshly cut timber filled his lungs. He was no longer the foreman of an oil rig, but the new maritime logistics coordinator for the Blackwater Port Authority, a role Arthur Jenkins had, with a gruff recommendation, helped him secure. It was not the early retirement he had envisioned with Sarah, but it was work that mattered, work that built, work that connected him directly to the beating heart of the town he had fought to save. Today, he supervised the installation of new safety moorings, a task demanding precision, strength, and an almost intuitive understanding of the sea's immense power. He barked an instruction to a younger lad wrestling with a hawser, his voice rough, but devoid of the brittle edge it once possessed. He could feel the solid weight of the work in his hands, the honest ache in his muscles, a grounding counterpoint to the dizzying heights and crushing lows of the last year. He thought of the deep blue abyss of the North Sea, the unforgiving oil rigs that had been his world. That life felt distant now, a dream that belonged to a different man. The wealth was gone, never to return, but so too was the blinding rage that had consumed him. He was a man of the docks of Blackwater, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly present. He walked past the newly painted facade of the Anchor Hold, a faint smile touching his lips. Astrid Lindholm, Dr. Lindholm to the papers, had truly made it a haven. Inside, the common room, once a clandestine war room adorned with flowcharts and red string, was now a vibrant hub. He saw through the window, an elderly woman, her eyes no longer vacant with despair, laughing softly with a younger man. They were sorting donations for the newly expanded charity shop. Astrid herself, her ash-blonde hair a little wilder than usual, emerged from her counseling office, a gentle hand on the shoulder of a young woman. The haven, bolstered by the public exposure of Thorne's schemes and a surge of donations, was thriving, providing genuine solace and rebuilding lives shattered by predatory manipulation. Astrid, once weary and disillusioned, now moved with a quiet, fierce purpose, her protective instincts channeled into healing, not just for her sister's memory, but for an entire community. She had found her voice, not in the sterile halls of academia, but in the compassionate, often messy reality of human recovery. Just a few blocks away, the familiar neon sign of the Blackwater Beacon glowed even brighter. Chloe Davies, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, was an institution now. Her exposé on Thorne's operations, initially printed on cheap newsprint, had been picked up nationally, then internationally. Her small office, once cluttered with local snippets, was now adorned with awards and framed accolades. She was still tenacious, still skeptical, but her gaze held a new, hard-won wisdom. She had given a voice to the voiceless, brought justice to light, and in doing so had etched her own name into Blackwater's enduring story. The newspaper, once struggling, now hired new, eager reporters, all drawn by Chloe's unwavering commitment to truth. She glanced up as Sully walked past, offering a quick, knowing smile, then plunged back into her keyboard, already chasing the next quiet injustice. Eleanor Vance had found a new kind of peace. She still worked at the library, the quiet hum of the shelves a familiar comfort. But the reclusive librarian, once fearful of Thorne's retribution, had stepped into the light. She was now a consultant, a quiet but formidable expert on financial fraud, advising a national task force. She had recently given a guest lecture at the regional university, her piercing blue eyes unwavering as she detailed Thorne's complex methods, a network of fine lines around her eyes now speaking of deep insight rather than fear. She still clutched her silver locket, a subtle reminder of her past, but it was a talisman of strength now, not sorrow. Her meticulous mind, once hidden, was a beacon against the shadows, validating a lifetime of quiet observation. Lena Volkov, the digital fixer, had traded her shadowy, gray area operations for a more legitimate, albeit still edgy, path. Her electronics repair shop, rebranded Cipher and Solutions, now specialized in cybersecurity for local businesses. She had just finished installing a new encrypted network for Arthur Jenkins, Marine Logistics, making his operations impenetrable to the very forces that had threatened them. She was still introverted, still prone to blunt sarcasm, but a spark of genuine satisfaction shone in her pale gray eyes. She saw the direct impact of her skills protecting honest livelihoods, a far cry from her solitary exploits. The purple streaks in her hair were brighter, perhaps, a subtle nod to her newfound, less guarded confidence. Down at the Salty Dog Tavern, Finn O'Connell nursed a pint of ale, watching the harbor with his deep sea-blue eyes. His shop, Finn's Fenders and Fixes, was busier than ever, a hub of genuine craftsmanship. He still grumbled, still held court with local gossip, but his cynicism was tempered by a deep, quiet pride in his community. He nodded as Sully walked by, a rare, almost imperceptible smile. He had seen a lot of men broken by the sea and by life. Sully was not one of them. Kieran Doyle, the cynical ex-detective, had found a measure of redemption. His private investigation business was thriving, specializing in white-collar crime and victim advocacy. He collaborated with a leaner, providing the street-level grit to her financial acumen, and even occasionally consulted for the local police, his tired gray eyes sharper than ever. He still chewed on a matchstick, a permanent fixture, but the weight on his shoulders seemed lighter. He had helped bring down a ghost from his past, and in doing so, had started to forgive himself. Vivienne Dubois, standing in the doorway of the Velvet Thread, watched the world with her piercing emerald eyes. Her vintage shop was bustling, a testament to her unique flair. She still possessed that air of theatrical elegance, but it was less a shield now, more an expression of a deeper authenticity. She had found an artistic purpose in guiding others, subtly advising small business owners on branding and presence, a social engineer for good. She no longer had to hide. Margaret Laurent, the independent insurance adjuster, had opened her own firm, Veritas Investigations. Her analytical mind, once focused solely on policies and claims, now served a broader justice. She worked closely with Astrid and Alina, fighting for restitution for Thorne's victims, her meticulousness a relentless force against corporate obfuscation. Her principled resolve was stronger than ever. Elias Montgomery, impeccably dressed as always, carefully polished a delicate silver frame in the gilded relic. His gallery was flourishing, a bastion of true craftsmanship and authenticity. He lectured on the dangers of forgery and the importance of provenance, his disdain for deception now a powerful, public voice. He was still fastidious, still preferred objects to people, but he had learned the value of fighting for what was genuinely real. Arthur Jenkins, his shoulders still slightly stooped, leaned against a newly stacked crate at Blackwater Marine Logistics. His business, while still a struggle, was stable, thanks in part to new contracts and the local pride in keeping Blackwater resilient. He gave a nod to Sully, a bond of shared struggle and respect passing between them. He had survived, proving that honest work, though hard, could endure. Carla Rossi's Scissors and Secret Salon was as vibrant as ever, but the gossip now carried a new tone, stories of recovery, of local heroes, of community strength. Her perceptive eyes missed nothing, but now she actively fostered connection and support, a silent matriarch of Blackwater's social fabric. She often shared quiet wisdom with Astrid, seeing the deeper currents beneath the chatter. Reese Sterling, standing outside the Salted Spoon, his chef's jacket crisp, watched the boats in the harbor. His gastropub, once a stage for Thorne's deception, was now a true beacon of Blackwater's renewed spirit, attracting discerning diners seeking authentic quality. He had maintained his integrity, and in doing so had weathered the storm, his pride rooted in genuine craft. And Declan Riley. He was the hardest to read, as always. Tide Turn Marine was a respected marine security and logistics firm offering legitimate services, but he still moved with that quiet, economical precision, his intense gray-blue eyes constantly scanning. He took solo sailing trips often, finding peace in the vastness of the sea. He was still the quiet protector, still living on the edges, but he had found his atonement. He had used his dangerous skills for a clear moral purpose, and that, for him, was enough. Sully leaned on the wooden rail, watching a lone trawler head out towards the gray horizon, its engine a low thrum against the vast silence of the sea. The North Sea, relentless and beautiful, had forged him, then broken him, and now, in its quiet strength, offered him solace. He was not the same man who had left Blackwater Bay all those months ago, chasing shadows and vengeance. The betrayal, the anger, the loss, they were still a part of him, etched into his very being, like the lines of a well-worn map. But they no longer defined him. He thought of Sarah, now serving her time, a painful echo of a life that could have been. He felt no anger now, only a weary understanding of the choices people make, the illusions they chase. He had lost everything material, but gained something far more precious, his dignity, his self-respect, and a profound, unshakable understanding of what truly mattered. Blackwater was healing, slowly, purposefully, and so was he. He was a man of the working coast, a man who had faced the depths of human deceit and risen, not with a fortune, but with a renewed sense of purpose, integrity, and the quiet, enduring strength of a community he had helped protect. He looked out at the churning waters, a new horizon opening before him, uncharted, but ready to be sailed. His future, like the North Sea itself, was vast, unpredictable, but utterly, uncompromisingly real. He knew how to read the currents now, and he was ready to chart his own course.
If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button to like it. And please do subscribe to support the channel.